Chapter 364. A big chapter of 8,000 words, you know. The cold wind never stopped blowing through the mountains. The vast snow was dancing in the air almost forever. It was lonely, monotonous, and cold. Whether it was wind, frost, rain, or snow, whether it was midsummer or winter, the wind and snow here seemed to be always unchanged, with a desolation that seemed to howl to the end of the world. There was a mountain in the snow. There was a city at the foot of the mountain. The exquisite and quaint black city was silent under the snow, black and white, looking extremely mysterious and majestic. Strong wind, heavy snow, high mountains, and black city. Under the sky that seemed to be always gloomy in the northwest, this was an extremely shocking picture. Gu Xingyun stood on the top of the mountain, facing the wind and snow. Kunlun was very big, but this mountain was the highest mountain in a radius of 100 miles. Standing here, the city was at his feet, the mountain was at his feet, and the whole world seemed to be crawling under his feet. Such a high position, Huading, Yuzhou, and all corners of the world were close at hand. Gu Xingyun could feel his absolute strength and see the absolute glory of Kunlun City. Xianxia State had already stood at the commanding heights of the world. And Kunlun City was at the highest point of Xianxia State. He stood at the peak of Kunlun City, looking down at the world. He had great achievements and unparalleled martial arts. Gu Xingyun laughed. His laughter easily passed through the heaven and earth and echoed among the mountains and snow. Blood flowed behind him. Dozens of corpses fell behind him, and blood stained a large area of snow. Gu Xingyun turned to look at the corpses. There were not many corpses, but they all had different appearances and figures. Every one of them represented the peak power in the world. Every weapon was a famous magic weapon in the dark world. But now the weapons were broken, and the so-called invincibility all became corpses. Gu Xingyun looked at his arm. There was a black arm guard wrapped around his arm, ferocious and gloomy. This was the human emperor, known as the first murderous weapon in the dark world. Gu Xingyun continued to laugh wildly, arrogantly, and presumptuously. At his feet, the famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai, Listen to the Sea, had been broken into two pieces. The body of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Xianxia State was almost completely submerged in the wind and snow. After Wang Tianzong, it was Li Honghe, Li Kuangde, deity, Lin Fengting, the master of Samsara Palace, tyrant of the Polar Ground Alliance, Saint War Angel Arcis of the Vatican, Cass Rotter, the god of war of Star State. Each and every famous name had now become a dead man. Gu Xingyun sneered and admired his work. He looked at the corpses one by one, and his expression became more and more satisfied. From beginning to end, when he saw the last corpse, Gu Xingyun frowned. He felt like he had overlooked something. It seemed like there was someone missing from these corpses. Who is missing? Who is still alive? He counted again. Wang Tianzong, Li Honghe, Li Kuangde, Summer Solstice, Sicangye, and even Li Shi's body were here. He couldn't remember who was missing. Gu Xingyun snorted coldly and said in a cold tone, "They should all be killed." He looked at the horizon. A ball of orange light lit up at the end of the gloomy and snowy world. The moment he entered his line of sight, the orange light suddenly spread out and turned into an endless raging fire. The fire burned the whole sky. The biting cold wind and flying snow all stopped. The burning sky slowly pressed down, the mountains were collapsing, and Haicheng was on the verge of collapse. Gu Xingyun's body seemed to have lost all its strength in an instant. He could only watch the fire full of destruction falling down and wrapping him up completely. Haicheng suddenly collapsed completely. In the loud roar, the world was dark. Gu Xingyun suddenly opened his eyes and sat up from the bed. It was sunny outside the window. The bright light shone through the window, and the room was clean and refreshing. Gu Xingyun's eyes were white, and his mouth and nose were full of the pungent smell of hospital disinfectant. He gasped for breath, and it took him a long time to realize that he had just experienced a dream. In the dream, he was powerful enough to overturn the whole world. The 6 groups in Xianxia State suffered heavy losses under his operation. The Li family and the Wang family of Beihai at their peak were destroyed by him, and all the superpowers in the world surrendered at his feet. At that time, he was very young, high-spirited, and arrogant. That was the most wonderful dream. But now looking back, in the constantly disappearing dream, Gu Xingyun could only feel fear. It was like the fear after experiencing the most terrible nightmare. His heart beat wildly, his head was covered with cold sweat, and his mouth was dry. He took a deep breath and suddenly got up to find water. But as soon as he moved, the tearing pain all over his body suddenly made him fall off the bed. His body trembled violently, and his mind was blank, but his heart was completely sober. He forgot the nightmare and remembered the night when he was attacked. Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan. Gu Xingyun gritted his teeth, endured the severe pain in his body, and moved back to the bed little by little. Like a wounded beast, he gasped deeply. Everything in his sight became completely clear. The room he was in was a ward. It seemed to be a single room, but at this time, there were 3 beds side by side. His bed was in the middle, and on the left was Li Qingqing in a hospital gown. The young girl, who had just turned 20 this year, was pale, and her long eyelashes blinked uneasily. The sun fell on her, with a kind of beautiful charm. She seemed to be in pain, but her breathing became steady. Gu Xingyun breathed a sigh of relief and looked at his unconscious daughter with complicated eyes. He turned his head and looked at the right side. Gu Qianxuan on the right side was also unconscious. Gu Xingyun glanced at him casually, and his movements suddenly froze. He stared at Gu Qianxuan lying on the bed. Gu Qianxuan was motionless, but there was nothing in the cuff of his clothes. Gu Xingyun had an incredible expression, as if he had seen a ghost in the daytime. There were hurried footsteps outside the door. The ward was pushed open, and a middle-aged man walked quickly into the ward with a solemn face. The man was handsome, but there was a very eye-catching scar on his face. He was slightly short and wore a lieutenant general's military uniform, looking extremely fierce and domineering. "Your Highness, are you okay?" The lieutenant general reached out and shook hands with Gu Xingyun, looking sincere and serious. But Gu Xingyun clearly saw a touch of gloating mockery in the other party's eyes. "I'm okay." Gu Xingyun's tone was cold. Yi Fengqing, the director of Huading's Special Operations Bureau. He was one of the backbone generals of the Wang family of Beihai. Among the experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm in Zhongzhou State, his strength might not be the top, but he was a famous madman. Gu Xingyun was attacked in Huading, so Yi Fengqing naturally had to visit him because of his position. "It's good that you're okay." Yi Fengqing smiled, pulled a chair at random, and sat down opposite Gu Xingyun. "Minister Zhang Qi is still investigating in Mount Dong. I have to say that the person who attacked you and Marshal Gu Qianxuan last night was really bold, but we haven't got too many clues yet. I wonder if you can provide us with some useful information? Oh, by the way, how many of your guards survived? I heard from them that you mentioned Li Tianlan's name?" Gu Qianxuan's face changed, and he took a deep look at Yi Fengqing. Yi Fengqing still smiled, but the mockery in his eyes was undisguised. He said meaningfully, "Is it true that the god of war in Zhongzhou State was seriously injured by a young man?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Gu Xingyun narrowed his eyes. He thought of everything last night, took a deep breath, and made up his mind in a short time. "I haven't seen Li Tianlan. I don't know the person who attacked me last night. This needs your Huading Special Operations Bureau to investigate. If you are short of manpower, you can report to the Special Warfare Headquarters, and Kunlun City can directly intervene." Gu Xingyun's voice was a little distorted and depressed. God knew how aggrieved he was when he said this. But he really didn't have enough evidence to pin Li Tianlan. If he continued to make trouble, the whole Kunlun City would become a joke for Li Tianlan's prestige. He could only hold back his anger. "We'll try our best." Yi Fengqing smiled, stood up, and said, "That's it? Your Highness, have a good rest. I've informed Secretary Zhong, and he will come to visit later." He turned and left the ward, his back unrestrained. Gu Xingyun looked at Yi Fengqing's back with a gloomy face, and the corners of his mouth twitched. After a long time, he muttered to himself, "This matter will not end like this." He couldn't find evidence to pin Li Tianlan. But Kunlun City now had far more strength than the Li family, and it had the same position as the Wang family of Beihai. If he couldn't find evidence, then he wouldn't look for it. He must die. He must die. This bastard, cut him into pieces and feed him to the dogs. A hoarse, painful voice with great resentment suddenly sounded in Gu Xingyun's ear. Gu Xingyun turned his head. On the bed on his right, Gu Qianxuan had woken up. He tightly covered his shoulder with one arm missing. His eyes were chaotic, and his whole face was distorted. He was ferocious and almost crazy. Gu Xingyun's heart was filled with anger. He was attacked and fled, but as long as he could hold on, the problem would not be very big. Gu Qianxuan's lost arm was the root of Kunlun City's disgrace. The arm of an invincible realm expert on the holy list was cut off by a young man. In addition to showing that Li Tianlan was amazing enough, it could only show the incompetence of Kunlun City. How did you end up like this? Gu Xingyun frowned and asked. Gu Qianxuan froze for a moment. He could hear the dissatisfaction in Gu Xingyun's tone. His face turned red in an instant, but he didn't know what to say. Was he careless? Or was he too concerned about Gu Xingyun's comfort? This explanation was objectively acceptable, but in Gu Xingyun's eyes, it undoubtedly showed that he was useless. Gu Qianxuan lowered his head and clenched his fists. If you're okay, take Qingqing and leave Huading first. Gu Xingyun said calmly. Gu Qianxuan raised his head subconsciously. What about you? Me? Gu Xingyun laughed at himself. I'm afraid that before dark, the news that I was seriously injured by Li Tianlan will spread throughout Zhongzhou State. If I don't show up, there are even many people who say that I'm dead. How can I go? Where can I go? I must stay to participate in the final maneuver. Before that, I can't go anywhere. If it was in normal times, Gu Xingyun naturally didn't care about these rumors. But now he was really seriously injured, and he was destined not to show up for a long time. In this way, these rumors were deadly enough. So it was impossible for him to leave Huading now. Even if he had to hold on, he had to hold on to the final maneuver. What about Li Tianlan? Are we just going to let it go? Gu Qianxuan's tone was gloomy. Let it go? Gu Xingyun sneered. He will die. And he will die in the maneuver. He didn't tell Yi Fengqing that it was Li Tianlan who attacked him, and he was not going to tell anyone. But it didn't mean that he would let it go. Let it go? How could it be possible? Gu Xingyun lowered his head, took out his mobile phone from the bag containing his dirty clothes, and dialed a number. Kunlun. In the majestic black city standing in the wind and snow, a white and delicate palm pressed the answer button, but she did not take the initiative to speak. The two ends of the phone were separated by the city, the wind and snow, the mountains and rivers, and the sea. There was only silence and numbness. Gu Xingyun seemed to have adapted to the other party's attitude, so on the phone, his tone did not fluctuate at all. Come to Huading. His tone was close to a command. What's the matter? Li Shi held the mobile phone in her hand tightly and asked numbly. Kill a man for me. Gu Xingyun's tone was cold. Didn't you say that you had nothing to do with the Li family? Very well, in the final maneuver, I will give you a chance to prove yourself. I want you to kill Li Tianlan in person at the scene of the maneuver. I don't want to hear nonsense. Come here right now. In the case that he was seriously injured, it was difficult for Gu Qianxuan to check and balance Li Tianlan. Kunlun City did not have so many deep foundations and secret troops with amazing destructive power. Even if there were, Gu Xingyun did not want to waste them on Li Tianlan. It was the safest choice to let Li Shi do it. When everyone marveled that there were 3 invincible realm experts in the high-end combat capability of the Jiang family of South America, only a few people knew that there were also 3 invincible realm experts in Kunlun City. There were only 2 invincible realm experts left in the Jiang family of South America. And there were still 3 in Kunlun City. What few people knew was that, as the governor of Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun was not the strongest expert in Kunlun City. In terms of strength, Li Shi, who came from Kunlun City and was favored by Li Guangtu in those days, was the strongest expert in Kunlun City. She had the 10th unique domain and the 24 moves of sword in her body. The numb and silent madam of the governor was the strongest expert in Kunlun City. Li Shi was silent and did not speak for a long time. What? Bitch, you don't want to do it. Gu Xingyun's tone gradually became irritable. Li Shi's hand holding the phone was still trembling, and her face was so pale that it seemed transparent. I have done it. She tried hard to control her emotions. 3 years ago, in Heaven Capital, I killed him once. But he is not dead. Gu Xingyun said in a cold tone. Then you kill him again and finish what you failed to do 3 years ago. Otherwise, I can't guarantee Qingqing's fate. Li Shi's face became paler. Qingqing. Qingqing again. Her trip to Heaven Capital 3 years ago was related to her daughter, Li Qingqing. At that time, if she did not go to Heaven Capital, Gu Xingyun would put Li Qingqing in Heaven Capital and even arrange her to be with Li Tianlan quietly. That result was equivalent to fundamentally determining Li Qingqing's fate in the future. Her daughter would repeat her path, and the old things would be reincarnated again. So she stopped Gu Xingyun and went to Heaven Capital in person. And recently, Gu Xingyun asked her to go to Huading, which was exactly the same threat as that year. It was very despicable. But it was absolutely effective. After the matter in Huading is over, you will go to Snow Country on behalf of Kunlun City. I will return your daughter to you afterward. Gu Xingyun said and hung up the phone directly. Li Shi seemed to be drained of all her strength in an instant. She put down the phone numbly. After a long silence, she slowly turned around and walked out of the door. The wind and snow outside the door were still howling. The whole Black City looked more and more gloomy. A maid came over and said respectfully and cleverly, "Madam, prepare the helicopter." Li Shi said numbly, "I'm going to Huading." In the era of explosive communication, any so-called intelligence was just a matter of a phone call or an email. If they were more cautious, it was just a matter of an encrypted phone call or an encrypted email. The attack on Gu Xingyun was a major event in Zhongzhou State. Major events were often not kept secret. So when the garrison of Huading, the police, and the Special Operations Bureau rushed to Winter Mountain together, Wang Shengxiao had already received a call from Yi Fengqing, the director of the Special Operations Bureau of Huading. When he received the call, Wang Shengxiao was still chatting with Song Si in bed. But after listening to the content of the phone, Wang Shengxiao, who had been calm since he broke through to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, changed his face completely. He kept the weird posture of answering the phone. Until a long time after Yi Fengqing hung up the phone, his movements did not change at all. There was no anger, no jealousy, no unwillingness. He sat quietly, and his eyes were full of surprise, doubt, and bitterness. What's wrong? Song Si clearly noticed Wang Shengxiao's unusual behavior. She put on her pajamas and sat beside him. Wang Shengxiao was motionless and unresponsive. When Song Si asked for the third time, he took a deep breath and glanced at Song Si. You said, Wang Shengxiao's voice was a little erratic, but his eyes gradually became calm. If I fight with all my strength now, how strong can I be? Song Si was thoughtful. Wang Shengxiao was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. But he had a top inheritance and was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm with wind and thunder veins. Such a person was strong enough to crush and even defeat all opponents in the same realm in any realm. How strong was Wang Shengxiao? Song Si thought for a moment and said softly, if you fight with all your strength, you should be able to fight against the top half-step invincible realm now. Ordinary half-step invincible realm experts will not be your match. Really strong. Wang Shengxiao laughed, but it was a little self-deprecating. How am I now compared to Brother Jiang? Brother Jiang? Song Si was a little confused. She thought for a moment and said uncertainly, Milord Di Jiang? Wang Shengxiao nodded. Milord Di Jiang is His Majesty's disciple. Now he has the combat capability of the invincible realm. He is about to become the youngest marshal in Zhongzhou State. Compared with him, you are still a little worse. Song Si said cautiously. Yes, I am indeed a little worse. Wang Shengxiao whispered to himself, but compared with Gu Qianchuan, Brother Jiang is also a little worse. Song Si was silent. Although Di Jiang with double thunder veins had not entered the invincible realm for the time being, compared with Gu Qianchuan who had just broken through the invincible realm, he should be on par or slightly stronger. But Gu Qianxuan had been in the invincible realm for 8 years. He had stabilized his realm, further understood the 10 skills of true martial arts, and successfully entered the holy list. Di Jiang was not in the invincible realm, so he was indeed a little inferior to Gu Qianxuan. But just a few hours ago, Li Tianlan attacked the purple gold pavilion. He not only broke Gu Qianxuan's arm, but also forced Gu Xingyun to flee. Wang Shengxiao finally smiled bitterly, and his eyes became more and more confused. How did he do all this? Song Si's face changed dramatically. It was not a big deal to force Gu Xingyun to flee. Gu Xingyun had been seriously injured. But it was really incredible that he broke Gu Qianxuan's arm. Had Li Tianlan entered the invincible realm? How could a 22-year-old invincible realm expert bear such a huge force? It's fake. Song Si did not even think much and said instinctively. Wang Shengxiao glanced at her and did not speak. He could imagine how much influence the news would have after it spread throughout Zhongzhou state. A great uproar was not enough to describe it. If there was a word to describe it, it would be stormy waves. Li Tianlan still had potential. But after what happened tonight, he not only had potential but his combat capability would also be recognized. He broke Gu Qianxuan's arm. Even if he was not in the invincible realm, he at least had the combat capability of the invincible realm. From now on, calling Li Tianlan Your Highness was really worthy of his name. And from today on, Li Tianlan had the value that all the young people, including Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan, did not have. How did the gap come about? How could it get farther and farther away? Wang Shengxiao did not know, but he knew very well that if he did not fight hard he might not even be able to see Li Tianlan's back. If it's true, Song Si's face was a little pale and even a little panicked. Then in the final maneuver, no. Wang Shengxiao whispered, he is really strong, but not strong enough to make me retreat without a fight. But if you insist, who can guarantee that Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu will also insist? Song Si's tone was hurried. They are them and I am me. Even if they all abstain, I will appear on the battlefield. If I don't even have the courage to fight, I don't know what the Wang family of Beihai will become under my leadership in the future. Wang Shengxiao glanced at Song Si calmly. It was already the early morning of the 24th. There was less than a week before the final maneuver. I want to meditate. Wang Shengxiao said, it's time to get ready. No matter the outcome, at least, I still have half a sword to choose. Song Si's face kept changing. Wang Shengxiao did have half a sword to choose. 3 years ago in Heaven Capital, he had used the sword intent of firmament to use the half-six paths. 3 years later, he had stood at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and could barely use the half-reincarnation. Although it was the half-reincarnation. But as long as he drew his sword, Wang Shengxiao believed that even in the face of the invincible realm, he could be invincible. Dongqing Wudi flew back to Zhongyuan from Yuzhou overnight. But when the sun rose, Dongqing Hanguang, whose biological clock had always been very regular, went downstairs and saw his son in a marshal's uniform sitting in the dining room eating breakfast at first glance. Dongqing Wudi was dealing with the soup dumplings in front of him. He ate very slowly, chewing and swallowing slowly, but his movements were extremely firm. In front of Dongqing Hanguang, he was a filial son. In front of Bai Qingqian, he was an incompetent husband. But in front of the soldiers of Zhongzhou State, he was always the invincible god of massacre of Zhongzhou State. This was a man who could give people a feeling of indomitable will even when eating. Dongqing Hanguang, who had not slept in the second half of the night, gave up the plan to go out for a walk and walked into the dining room. He waved his hand, motioned his son, who had stood up, to sit down, and asked casually, "When did you come back?" "Less than 2 hours." Dongqing Wudi swallowed the steamed bun and said calmly, "Did you hear the news last night?" Dongqing Hanguang picked up a steamed bun and whispered. Dongqing Wudi laughed, with a kind of brilliance different from iron-blooded killing on his face. "Good boy," he cut off one of Gu Qianxuan's arms. Standing in front of him, I'm no longer his opponent. Amazing. If he grows up smoothly, he may really enter the invincible realm before the age of 30. Dongqing Hanguang also smiled, but there was some worry in his eyes. I said, the stronger he is, the more dangerous he is. If his injury last night was not serious, he should win in the final maneuver. But the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. Kunlun City is not to be feared. Dongqing Wudi said, Gu Xingyun is seriously injured, and Gu Qianchuan's arm is broken. There is no threat for the time being. Stupid. Dongqing Hongguang's eyes darkened, and he said coldly, Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan are not a threat, but how can you be sure that woman will not take action? That woman. Dongqing Wudi's face changed, and he was silent. In a sense, the woman's breakthrough into the invincible realm was the most important opportunity for Kunlun City to make up its mind to overthrow Li Kuangtu. If she joins forces with the Wang family of Beihai, she and Wang Tianzong, how can Tunlan survive? Dongqing Hongguang said slowly. Dongqing Wudi picked up a steamed bun and put it in his mouth. He slowly bit the steamed bun and said slowly, It's okay. Dongqing Hongguang glanced at him. Tianlan is still young, and there are some things that he should not bear. The younger generation's affairs should be solved by the younger generation. If they want to bully the weak, they have to ask for my permission. He sneered slightly. Wang Tianzong? And that woman? She is really strong. But what can she do no matter how strong she is? Have you made up your mind? Dongqing Hongguang's tone was light. It's not determination. Dongqing Wudi smiled. Dad, this is the most correct decision. We may give up something for the time being, but only temporarily. If I don't make this decision this time, when the truth comes out, the people of the Dongqing clan will be disunited. Dongqing Hongguang was silent. Hidden Dragon Sea. After a long silence, he suddenly said, I've met with the president. Dongqing Wudi said calmly, the president will go abroad for a visit in a few days. Dongqing Hongguang's face relaxed, and he said with a smile, What are you going to do? It's just a head-on confrontation. Dongqing Wudi said, I'm ready. In addition, I've contacted Qin Weibai, and she will secretly cooperate with me on some things. Qin Weibai. Dongqing Hongguang's eyes flashed with inexplicable brilliance. She is indeed a strange woman. She is now in Snow Country, and I don't know what she is planning. Snow Country, troubled times, great changes are coming. Dongqing Wudi chuckled. The real storm is coming, hey. Dongqing Hongguang smiled, and his tone was complicated. Snow Country Mormons. Qin Weibai was looking at a document sent from Zhongzhou State. In the spacious study, a figure shrouded in a black cloak was holding a copy and looking at it seriously. There was not much content in the document. So in just a few minutes, Qin Weibai had put the document on the desk. Is my man powerful? Qin Weibai patted the document gently. She seemed to be in a good mood, and her laughter was a little loud. Tianlan is in danger. The voice of the man wrapped in a cloak was elegant. His figure looked like a military counselor or a saint, but there were some differences. He put down the copy in his hand, hesitated, and reached out to tear off the cloak on his body. He said helplessly, I'm really not used to this. How did the two military counselors and saint get used to this thing? After the cloak was taken off, a handsome and elegant face appeared in the study. A face that should have been in Lin, and at this time. The patriarch of the Lin clan, Lin Fengting. They're not used to it either. Qin Weibai said with a smile, but they have to hide their identities, so they have to get used to it. As the patriarch of the Lin clan, if you don't enter the secular world, you have to suffer for a while. Lin Fengting shook his head helplessly and pointed to the document on the table. Once the news gets out, Tianlan will be in danger. Tianzong and Kunlun City will definitely not let him go. Maybe they will take action at the scene of the final maneuver. He paused and said, Am I too early? It's okay. Qin Weibai shook her head with certainty. Her voice was very soft and her tone was very confident. Dongqing Wudi is trustworthy. As long as he is here, Tianlan will be fine. You can only protect him for a while in Zhongzhou State. It doesn't make much sense. As long as the deterrent of the Dongqing clan is still there, no one will dare to act rashly. Between the top force and the super-wealthy family, in terms of power, the super-wealthy family is better. Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes and said softly, "Then what am I doing here now? It doesn't seem to make sense here. It's easier to find the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance from here. The Polar Ground Alliance is in civil strife, and the tyrant has become a coward. It's really not easy to find him. But I already have a clue, and there will be results in a few days. The final battle will be held in Snow Country, and the Polar Ground Alliance is the best signal." Qin Weibai said calmly. "You mean, the final battle will be held in the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance?" Lin Fengting raised his eyebrows. Qin Weibai shook her head and pointed to her feet. "The final battle will be held here. Snow Country, Mormon City. This was the final battle site that the Samsara Palace, which provoked the chaos in the Dark World, had set up 3 years ago." Lin Fengting just wanted to ask something, and a phone suddenly rang. Qin Weibai looked at the number and answered the phone. On the phone, a calm voice sounded. "The fish has taken the bait." Qin Weibai didn't say much and hung up the phone directly. Lin Fengting also heard the phone and asked subconsciously, "The fish has taken the bait. What do you mean?" "I sent someone to attack summer solstice. But I also said that I would give Wang Tianzong a chance to go crazy." Qin Weibai said softly, "So when I sent someone to find the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance, I deliberately used some bait to leak the headquarters of the Samsara Palace. Wang Tianzong has taken the bait." "The headquarters of the Samsara Palace?" Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes. "What's there? A tight dragnet? A trap?" "There's nothing." Qin Weibai shook her head. "There's only one opportunity for the final battle." Lin Fengting was silent for a while, and then said in a complicated tone, "If so, it's not necessarily the headquarters of the Samsara Palace, is it? It can be regarded as the headquarters." Qin Weibai said, "It's indeed the place where the core members of the Samsara Palace have been stationed for many years. It can be regarded as the headquarters." She hesitated, glanced at Lin Fengting and continued, "The real headquarters of the Samsara Palace is in Zhongzhou State. It has always been in Zhongzhou State. I put it in the most conspicuous position, but no one can see it." Chapter 365. Deity looked at the sky in Wangtian Pavilion. In the evening, the sky of Heaven Capital was gloomy. The wind was blowing and it was raining. Benny, the biggest typhoon of the year, was about to land on East Island from Heaven Capital. The roaring hurricane shook the whole city. Looking from above, the whole Heaven Capital was in a frenzy in the hurricane. Deity stood on the rooftop of Wangtian Pavilion, dressed in black. The gale close to level 10 was blowing, and the rain kept falling, but it didn't shake his clothes at all. He just stood there, in a trance. The roaring wind, the pouring rain, and the gloomy sky were all fake, and he was the most real. Deity looked up at the sky. The rain was falling fast, and the sky was gloomy. The night was coming, and there was a touch of darkness in the sky. Deity, dressed in black, seemed to be integrated with the night, and the whole night seemed to become vivid. There was no light in Wangtian Pavilion. The headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was the tallest building in the entire Heaven Capital. It was pitch black and looked extremely dignified and majestic. On a stormy night, the lightless Skyview Pavilion was like a black monster standing in the Heaven Capital. Occasionally, lightning flashed across the sky. Under the pale electric light, the black Skyview Pavilion looked somewhat ferocious. A white figure appeared in the pitch-black but vivid night. The white shadow walked up to the rooftop in a hurry. The moment he saw Deity, he subconsciously slowed down. He held a letter tightly in his hand. Perhaps it was due to his excitement, but his eyes were extremely bright. His handsome and somewhat devilishly handsome face also became a little devilish because of this. Daybreak, the Senluo Temple Master of Heaven Capital. He was also the person closest to Deity in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. This closeness was based on strength and relationship. The murderous weapon of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, Shadow the Ripper, had always been in the hands of Daybreak. This alone was enough to show Deity's absolute trust in Daybreak. "Your Highness." Daybreak walked behind Deity and said respectfully, "What are you so happy about?" Deity said with a chuckle, He was still looking at the night sky, and there was no smile in his eyes, only coldness. A letter from Xianxia State. Daybreak gave the letter in his hand to Deity. Deity took it but didn't open it. He already knew what was going to be said in the letter. A lot of news could be passed to him by a phone call. But Xianxia State sent a letter at this time. He didn't need to read it to know that the contents of the letter were not what he wanted to see. Deity silently looked at the envelope in his hand. After a long time, he meticulously tore the envelope open and took out the folded letter inside. There were a few lines of familiar handwriting on the paper, but because it had been too long, they had become somewhat unfamiliar. The handwriting was firm and elegant, but the strokes of the pen moved freely, revealing a kind of unrestrained strength that flowed like clouds and water. The purgatory of heaven capital cannot replace Tianen. You can't replace this world either. Tianlan is already invincible. Why don't we lower our heads? Why don't you let go? The letter had no opening or ending. There were only a few sentences. Deity squinted at the last 8 words. He might as well lower his head. It was better to let go. His heart was a little cold, but he wasn't angry. He just focused on the letter in front of him, as if he was thinking. Pausa. Daybreak did not leave. Seeing Deity finish reading the letter, he asked casually. Deity stood quietly. Under the heavy rain, his clothes were dry and tidy, but the rain kept falling on the letter. The letter was gradually soaked, broken, and finally turned into scraps of paper, falling into the rain on the rooftop. He wants me to bow my head and let go. Deity's tone was calm. What do you think? Tianan? Daybreak raised his eyebrows. Tianan. Deity's tone became more and more indifferent. Daybreak suddenly fell silent. The chaotic sound of wind and rain still rang out. There was thunder rolling above the sky, and the atmosphere on the rooftop was oppressive and dull. I can't control it. Daybreak was silent for a long time before he said blandly. There were only him and Deity here, so he spoke casually. You underestimated the extent of the old master's control of the purgatory of heaven capital. You also underestimated the tacit understanding between him and Qin Weibai. At that time, we marched into Tianan, and now we can't stop halfway. You were set up by them. The situation in Tianan is now out of control. Most importantly, you underestimated the speed of Tianlan's growth. A smile appeared on Daybreak's face. He spoke from the standpoint of God, but his eyes became brighter when he mentioned Li Tianlan's strength. This behavior was very weird, which was enough to prove his entangled position. The invincible realm at the age of 22. Such a result was enough to give everyone confidence. Moreover, I have the utmost confidence. Deity was silent. Just like what Daybreak had said. Heavenly South seemed to be in control, but in reality, it was already on the verge of losing control. The Dark Azura Hall of Breaking Dawn was now stationed in Tianan and was the main combat force of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in Tianan. But most of the members of Sunluo Hall were the elites of the Eastern Theater of Operations who stayed in East Island in the final battle of Heaven Capital 3 years ago, pretending to be dead. They were Ning Ziyuan's men. In addition to the Sunluo Hall, the leaders of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital that had invested in Tianan also had other origins. What was the Purgatory of Heaven Capital? It was a super force in the dark world created by Deity. It was a behemoth that was constantly developing in East Island with the support of the East Island royal family. But in the end, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. 3 years ago, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital appeared in Heaven Capital. 3 years ago, the border war of Xianxia State broke out. 3 years ago, the Li family, with the last afterglow, confronted the 5 major forces of the dark world that invaded the border of Xianxia State. In that fierce battle, there were not many people left in the Li family, and some people were destined to sleep because of it. However, there were even more people who directly fell into purgatory after so-called death. They fell into the purgatory of Heaven Capital. After the real death, there was eternal darkness. And after the illusory death, there was real freedom. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital in East Island appeared. The Li family of Xianxia state suffered heavy losses. Behind all these appearances, quietly, a decaying old force was transferring its power to a new superforce. The combination of time was flawless. In 3 years, or even more than 20 years, the veterans who fell into purgatory from the Li family became the backbone of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. To some extent, deity could not represent the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Deity represented only deity. Deity and these veterans were the most complete purgatory of Heaven Capital. This was the purgatory of Heaven Capital, and also the Li family after Nirvana rebirth. The layout of Tianan was the first step for the purgatory of Heaven Capital to return to Xianxia state. If deity wanted to regain Xianxia state, he was bound to face countless conspiracies. Tianan was the most suitable entry point. So when Qin Weibai suggested that he march to Tianan, he did not hesitate. And in order to gain a foothold in Tianan, all the people he sent were the backbone who were most familiar with Tianan. Who was most familiar with Tianan? Naturally, it was the people who had stayed the longest in the camp on the border near Tianan and were familiar with Tianan. The people who received the order were in high spirits. Deity did not doubt the loyalty of these people. He could be sure that these people would listen to him completely. But the problem was that these people would listen to his orders, but they would also listen to Li Tianlan's orders. Li Tianlan grew too fast. Now he had the combat capability of the invincible realm. In this way, the entire Tianan became a tailor-made base for Li Tianlan. Ning Ziyuan, who cherished the Li family, was transferred to be the commander of the Tianan Freedom Corps. Di Jiang, the biggest resistance of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, had returned to the Wang family of Beihai. If there were no accidents, he would become the youngest marshal in Xianxia state in the near future and serve as the new commander of the Border Control Corps. But the Blood Battalion was still controlled by Dongqing Wudi. The new commander of the Blood Battalion, Thunder God, was a well-deserved core figure of the Dongqing clan. The Southwest Special Warfare Headquarters was occupied by Mount Shu. The Spirit Tortoise Group, the most elite terracotta army of Xianxia state, had been transferred to Tianan. What would happen when Li Tianlan arrived in Tianan? He would become the banker in the entire Tianan. Everything around him. Whether it was Xianxia state or the purgatory of Heaven Capital. To some extent, it was his power. A 22-year-old young man, his current strength and future potential were worthy of absolute trust. He would occupy Tianan as quickly as possible and let the Li family shine again there. But the purgatory of Heaven Capital could not do anything. Deity. Li Tianlan. Everyone in the purgatory of Heaven Capital took it for granted that these two people could never have any contradictions or differences. Once deity made a move, the entire purgatory of Heaven Capital would be confused. Deity could not afford such consequences. Because he had his responsibilities. I will let go. The rain was heavier. In the roaring rain, deity's voice was a little vague. But I will not lower my head. At this moment, he thought of the old man of the Li family and Qin Weibai. The old master had prepared for today's game for more than 20 years. But the most critical border battle was caused by the Samsara Palace intentionally or unintentionally. How long had Qin Weibai prepared for today's situation? You won't lower your head? Daybreak asked softly. His voice was a little vague and complicated. Is there still a chance? He whispered, Huawu is dead. There is a chance. Deity's tone was flat. Don't forget that I still have cooperation with Qin Weibai. He paused and said calmly, Do you know why I sent people to Mount Dibbing to attack summer solstice? His tone was somewhat meaningful. Daybreak thought about it, and his face suddenly changed. I know summer solstice's strength very well. Deity's tone was calm. I also know her state. The reason why I sent our own people to die is that the leaders that time were the 4 most powerful supermasters of the Samsara Palace. If I'm not wrong, it will be difficult for the 4 of them to participate in anything in Snow Country. So, Daybreak's tone was a little dry. The Samsara Palace is weak and is doomed to perish this time. As soon as the master of Samsara Palace and Qin Weibai die, I will take my time to play with Li Tianlan. He looked at Daybreak and whispered, The final battle in Snow Country will be very lively this time. Maybe in the end, a few half-step invincible realm experts will be enough to decide the whole battle. I plan to take you and Dawn to Snow Country. Daybreak, can I trust you? Phoenix won't go? Daybreak was stunned. There was a flash of tenderness in Deity's eyes. Daybreak opened his mouth. I will go with you. His voice was a little dry, and his eyes were a little dazed. I was only 16 years old when I followed you. You used to be a marshal in others' hearts. Now you are His Highness in others' hearts. But in my heart, you are the big brother before and after the treason. The most respectable brother. He stared into Deity's eyes. You can trust me. But I need a reason. Why did I become like this? In my opinion, there is nothing wrong with Tianlun. Why don't you agree with him? His tone was very serious. He stared into Deity's eyes, fierce and serious, without flinching. Perhaps his eyes were too sharp. So Deity turned his head and looked at Heaven Capital, which was in the midst of wind and rain. Because he doesn't deserve it. Deity whispered. When he said this, his eyes were extremely stubborn. Chapter 366. Crossing the sea and the glacier, in the depths of the beautiful yet extremely cold polar region, two black-clothed men silently moved forward in the world of ice and snow. It was summer in the northern hemisphere, but the deepest part of the polar region was still full of ice. Glaciers lingered on the frozen seawater. The sun shone on the glaciers, shining with a dreamy luster. Everything in sight was white, transparent, and holy. The two men in black walked in a clean and pure world. Looking from a distance, they were like the two most striking black spots. They climbed over one glacier after another as if they were walking on flat ground. Summer in the Arctic was the polar day. Standing on the pole, front, back, left, right, east, west, north, south, they were all south. The moment the scorching sun set in the south, before the darkness fell, the sun rose again. There was no night in the polar day, only day. Time seemed to have lost its meaning. The two men in black walked all the way in the polar region in silence. The two black-clothed people were a man and a woman. The woman walking in front had a tall and voluptuous figure. Her entire body was wrapped in a black cloak, and from her back, she could be said to be mighty and strong. The man following behind her was thin and even a little thin. The wide cloak was draped over his body, making him look empty, but vaguely giving off a sense of elegance. He silently followed the tall woman in front of him, silent like a shadow. The rising summer sun shone in the depths of the polar region. The sun dyed every corner of the polar region golden. A man and a woman climbed the glacier in front and stood at the top. The deepest part of the entire base suddenly appeared in front of them. This was the coldest place in the core of the entire polar region. The wind and snow whistled under the sun, with biting cold and sharp ice chips. A mountain appeared in front of the men in black. A mountain completely condensed from ice. It was not realistic to say that it was a glacier. In front of the two, it was simply an endless mountain range. The mountain range was tall and magnificent, boundless. The holy white and the sky seemed to be connected, which was a kind of breathtaking magnificence and magnificence. Behind the glacier was the core of the polar region and the endless deep sea, which was beyond human reach. It's here. After a long silence, the tall and plump woman took the initiative to break the silence and whispered, Barental Glacier. Barental. It was the ancient language of a small ethnic group in the northernmost part of the snow country. It meant the end of the world. The man behind the woman took off the cloak that made him uncomfortable. He took a deep breath. Under the sun, it was a handsome face that very few people in the dark world knew, but it was indeed standing at the peak of the dark world's martial power. Nice scenery. Lin Fengting looked around and chuckled. Maybe I should go to the South Pole after this. He had been to too many places over the years. They were beautiful, but there were very few places that were purer than the polar region. I like it here. There's no taste of the mortal world. It's like heaven but also like hell. You like it? The tall woman turned around and looked at Lin Fengting. The hood of the cloak was very big, and it perfectly covered her entire face. Her eyes were hidden in the darkness, and her gaze was a little blurry. Lin Fengting had already cooperated with Samsara Palace. But in the entire Samsara Palace, there was only one person who could pull Lin Fengting from Mormons to the deepest part of the polar region. It could only be the most mysterious master of Samsara Palace. Palace Lord doesn't like it? Lin Fengting laughed and looked at the Barental Glacier in front of him, which was connected to heaven and earth. From another angle, he could also see the endless deep sea behind the glacier. The glacier was white. The sea behind the glacier was blue and a little black, with a kind of majestic pressure that made people desperate. It was black and white. It was like heaven but also like hell. Since you like it, how about I give the glacier to you? The master of Samsara Palace said. Everyone in Samsara Palace called Lin Fengting Mr., but others called him Mr. out of respect and politeness. But when the master of Samsara Palace said it, there was no emotional fluctuation at all. What's the use of giving it to me? Lin Fengting said with a smile, just take a look. Can I live in it? Living in it may not be worse than living in the headquarters of the Lin clan. The master of Samsara Palace pointed at the glacier in front of her and said calmly, this is what I'm looking for. Lin Fengting was stunned, looking at the magnificent glacier in front of him that seemed to occupy the entire polar region. The master of Samsara Palace asked him out just to say that she wanted to find something. Lin Fengting didn't ask what it was. With his strength, he didn't have to worry about anyone plotting against him. Until now, Lin Fengting didn't know that the master of Samsara Palace was looking for this glacier. Here, Lin Fengting was a little hesitant. Now in the whole dark world, perhaps he was the only one who knew the identity of the master of Samsara Palace. Lin Fengting had seen this mysterious master more than once in Lin. He knew her past and could foresee her future. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made the decision to let her control the Lin clan for the next 20 years. However, this woman's thinking was too imaginative. She had such a great advantage in some aspects that it was difficult for smart people to thoroughly understand her plan. This is the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance. The master of Samsara Palace said in a calm tone that could be said to be earth-shattering news. The real headquarters. It's inside the Barental Glacier. Lin Fengting's body shook instinctively. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the master of Samsara Palace. The headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance? In the Dark World, it was not difficult to find the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance at all, because they were different from the Samsara Palace. This was an alliance. It was an alliance with Snow Country as the core, and its tentacles extended to more than a dozen countries in Eastern Europe. Its sphere of influence was super large but relatively loose. The headquarters of such a force could be said to be the most conspicuous place. In everyone's intelligence, the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance should be in the polar circle not far from Mormons on a glacier. It was not in the core of the polar region, but inside the largest glacier in the polar region. The distance between the two headquarters was at least thousands of kilometers. So, like the Samsara Palace, the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance in Mormons is fake? Lin Fengting was shocked and immediately returned to normal. After all, he was just an ally of the Samsara Palace. The Lin clan didn't enter the secular world. No matter how mysterious the Polar Ground Alliance was, it had nothing to do with him. That's also true, because it is indeed the place where the Polar Ground Alliance handles daily affairs, but the headquarters here is more hidden. Only a few core figures of the Polar Ground Alliance are qualified to enter here. And some small-scale but sophisticated laboratories inside the Polar Ground Alliance are also here. The master of Samsara Palace explained meticulously. Lin Fengting suddenly smiled. You knew this place before, didn't you? Just some rough clues, very vague. This was not a place I paid attention to before. The master of Samsara Palace's tone was calm. Some vague clues can be found in the most hidden headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance in a few days? Lin Fengting obviously didn't believe it. It's 3 years. The master of Samsara Palace turned to look at Lin Fengting. From 3 years ago, the people of the Samsara Palace were looking for it with those vague clues, until a few days ago. Lin Fengting looked at the glacier in front of him. There was nothing strange about the glacier, cold and holy. But inside the glacier was the headquarters of the superpower in Eastern Europe, or even the entire Dark World, which had the most complicated structure, or it could be said to be bloated. Lin Fengting felt it incredible. It might not be difficult to open up the glacier, but organizations with a long history like the Polar Ground Alliance had deep foundations, which were completely different from the newly rising Samsara Palace. Why did they need to build such a hidden headquarters here? The Samsara Palace needed to be hidden. In the final analysis, it was because they were not strong enough and their foundations were poor. The Lin clan was unknown because they were hiding from the world, and only their headquarters were hiding from the world. The branches of the Lin clan scattered all over the world were quite confident in their own territory. Just like the Wang family of Beihai. Their headquarters was in Beihai province, on Mount Dipping. But for hundreds of years, who dared to provoke them? Most of the people with such courage were dead. That was the strength and confidence. The Polar Ground Alliance should have such confidence, but why did they build their headquarters here? If it was not because of the lack of confidence, it could only mean that there was a great secret here. Lin Fengting sat down on the glacier. The howling snow and ice chips in the sky suddenly stopped for a moment as he sat down. The world was quiet. Do you need me to take action today? Lin Fengting asked. Mormons was at least 1,000 kilometers away from here. It was the place of the final battle, but the master of Samsara Palace appeared here. No matter what her purpose was, she couldn't be here for sightseeing. Yes. The master of Samsara Palace nodded. To what extent? To kill tyrant? Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes. The Polar Ground Alliance. Tyrant. He ranked 8th on the new divine list, holding the murderous weapon of Snow Country, Mountain Shatter. Both he and the murderous weapon were absolute power-type masters. When he attacked, he even had the courage to tear mountains and fill the ocean. The master of Samsara Palace ranked 4th on the divine list. But according to Lin Fengting's understanding of the master of Samsara Palace, if Tyrant held Mountain Shatterer, when Blue Sky Underworld was not around, the master of Samsara Palace could hardly be Tyrant's opponent under normal conditions. Even if she could win, she would inevitably be seriously injured. On the premise that Mountain Shatterer runs out of energy, seriously injure Tyrant. The master of Samsara Palace whispered, a living tyrant is more in the interest of the Samsara Palace. Is there any interest in the Samsara Palace? Lin Fengting looked at the master of Samsara Palace with a meaningful look in his eyes. The Dark World was in chaos, but the situation was getting clearer and clearer. Northern Europe, Tiannan, North America, and South America were battlefields everywhere. The forces of the Samsara Palace were operating in various battlefields, so they suffered heavy losses. Before the final battle began, the Samsara Palace was already crippled. Now the flames of war were about to burn in Eastern Europe led by the Samsara Palace. Even the most optimistic people found it hard to believe that the Samsara Palace had any way out. Destruction seemed to be the only ending. Destruction was imminent. What was the use of the so-called interest? Of course. The master of Samsara Palace's tone was certain and firm. Only then did Lin Fengting remember that the real headquarters of the Samsara Palace was in Xianxia State. The real headquarters of the Samsara Palace is in Xianxia State. You are in Snow Country, so the real headquarters will definitely be handed over to someone worthy of your trust. I think I understand why military counselor and saint didn't come to Snow Country. The real headquarters of the Samsara Palace is controlled by military counselor and saint, right? The master of Samsara Palace was silent. The code name military counselor, as the name suggests, I can probably understand his position in the Samsara Palace. Saint, this title is interesting. Is he your disciple? Lin Fengting's smile was a little strange and playful, as if he had thought of something interesting. He doesn't recognize my martial arts. The master of Samsara Palace said blandly, and I have nothing to teach him. But there is a piece of information left by a real chosen one in the Samsara Palace. If there is no accident, that information is enough for him to step into the invincible realm at the last moment. Saint can also be regarded as a disciple of the chosen one. The chosen one, A touch of regret flashed in Lin Fengting's eyes. He knew who the chosen one in the Master of Samsara Palace was. How do you explain that information to Saint? Lin Fengting asked in a complicated tone. The Master of Samsara Palace did not speak. Lin Fengting seemed to understand something. He nodded and said to himself, "It turns out that Saint also knows your identity. So, it sounds like a deal between the Samsara Palace and the Saints?" Silence responded to him. Then such a person is not worthy of your complete trust. So, everything in the Samsara Palace is in the hands of military counselor? Why do you trust military counselor? Lin Fengting seemed to be a chatterbox and kept talking. Because he is a smart person. The Master of Samsara Palace answered in a simple tone, as if she did not want to talk more. Lin Fengting thought for a while and nodded in agreement. He is indeed smart. The Master of Samsara Palace took out an ancient pocket watch and looked at it. The pocket watch had a complicated dial, showing the time and date. The night of July 26th. It was already the morning of July 26th in Zhongzhou State. The Master of Samsara Palace raised her head and looked at the scorching sun hanging high in the polar day. "Today, you only need to help me block Mountain Shatter," the Master of Samsara Palace said softly. Among the 12 murderous weapons, Mountain Shatter was extremely powerful. Without Mountain Shatter, Tyrant's strength would be reduced. The Master of Samsara Palace alone was enough. "Tell me your plan." Lin Fengting said calmly, "The whole plan. The whole plan is the Polar Ground Alliance." The Master of Samsara Palace said clearly, "This is the battlefield I chose a long time ago. After today, there will be new opportunities in the Dark World." The Master of Samsara Palace looked at the glacier in front of her and asked, "What is the Polar Ground Alliance?" Before Lin Fengting answered, she had already said to herself, "The so-called Polar Ground Alliance, the alliance is the most important. It is a super force supported by Snow Country and more than a dozen surrounding countries. The oligarchs of Snow Country, the wealthy families of the surrounding countries, and some dark forces in Eastern Europe form an interest group. The final battle in Heaven Capital 3 years ago was just a rehearsal. It can be regarded as the first half of the plan, and the second half is in Snow Country." Lin Fengting listened quietly. Everyone has ambition. The stronger the strength, the greater the power, and the higher the status, the more uncontrollable the ambition. It can be said that the Polar Ground Alliance controls the power of Snow Country and more than a dozen surrounding countries in some aspects. But is it really so? The Polar Ground Alliance was established by the Eastern European countries. It is better to say that the Polar Ground Alliance is constrained by the Eastern European countries. If you are a tyrant, you have the seemingly largest superforce in the Dark World, but you have to face the constraints from Snow Country and other countries all day long. Are you willing to do that? What is a tyrant like that? Puppet. Lin Fengting blurted out subconsciously. That's why the Polar Ground Alliance had internal strife a few years ago. Because the Polar Ground Alliance also wanted to change, or Tyrant himself wanted to change. He set up the headquarters here and brought his most trusted subordinates here. He wanted to develop slowly and finally get rid of the shackles of various countries to become the only real tyrant in the dark world of Eastern Europe. The Master of Samsara Palace seemed to smile, but her smile was a little cold. What the Samsara Palace did was to cooperate with Tyrant. But we moved a little fast. After seizing the opportunity, we accelerated Tyrant's plan by 10 times or even dozens of times. It was so fast that he didn't even have time to react. Lin Fengting just figured out a little meaning, and the Master of Samsara Palace had made a clear conclusion. Tyrant's secret action was tantamount to challenging the bottom line of the Eastern European countries. The Samsara Palace secretly promoted and accelerated this process. The Samsara Palace might fail, but Tyrant would definitely fail. As long as Tyrant was seriously injured today and the headquarters here was exposed, the Polar Ground Alliance would not only have internal strife, but completely fall apart. The Eastern European countries waiting for the opportunity will use all means to deal with Tyrant. The powerful families of the Polar Ground Alliance will also fight for power and profit internally. The Polar Ground Alliance without Tyrant is still the Polar Ground Alliance. This is a great benefit that no one, including Snow Country, can ignore. Therefore, the Dark World will have a decisive battle in Eastern Europe, and the countries in Eastern Europe will also fight openly and secretly for the Polar Ground Alliance. If different countries want to rebuild the Polar Ground Alliance and get the real leadership, they will inevitably contact other superpowers. The master of Samsara Palace paused and suddenly laughed. Ha! Lin Fengting only felt his scalp tingle. He stared at the master of Samsara Palace as if he were looking at a madman. He suddenly wondered if his decision was right. It was the madman in front of him who took advantage of the opportunity of tyrants seeking change and directly decided the place of the final battle for the Dark World that had been in war for 3 years. The most important thing was that even the war in the Dark World. It was also provoked by the Samsara Palace. What would such a final battle look like? All the countries in Eastern Europe would intervene secretly. More than a dozen countries would fight openly and secretly, and even kill each other secretly. Several superpowers in the Dark World had their own positions. The superpowers would form alliances, and the countries would form alliances. But the so-called allies could betray them at any time. This was a huge benefit that could drive anyone crazy. The Eastern European countries would go crazy. All the superpowers in the Dark World would go crazy. Tyrant would also go crazy. All the ambitious Invincible Realm experts would also go crazy. All of them. This would be an extremely chaotic era and an extremely crazy final battle. Compared with the final battle in Heaven Capital 3 years ago, this was the real general trend of the Dark World. Lin Fengting didn't know what such madness meant. Did it mean a new era after the end of an era? He stared at the master of Samsara Palace. Not even for a moment. What are you looking at? The master of Samsara Palace's expression was hidden in the cloak, but her voice was a little colder. I really don't like you now. Lin Fengting laughed. The master of Samsara Palace didn't speak, but her aura gradually became cold. Her eyes were fixed on the glacier ahead. Be careful. Although Lin Fengting didn't like the master of Samsara Palace, he still reminded her. The master of Samsara Palace didn't speak. Her body completely straightened in an instant. The ice and snow roared past. The black cloak on her flew up and made a loud noise. Lin Fengting sat where he was, motionless, as if he was extremely quiet. The master of Samsara Palace took a step forward. The whole space was suddenly torn apart. Her figure moved very fast. Under the bright summer sun, she turned into a black line. In just an instant, she appeared above the Barental Glacier. The glacier was silent. The master of Samsara Palace opened her hands, as if she was embracing the whole world. An ethereal but extremely condensed sword intent condensed the moment she opened her hands. The sword energy rushed up to the sky. The vague and sharp sword energy traversed the whole sky and covered the glacier. The wind and snow on the ground were rolling wildly. The ultimate sword intent was rising. Finally, it fell. In the depths of the polar region, the Barental Glacier, known as the end of the world, shook. Cracks spread on the glacier one after another. Huge waves rose in the sea behind the glacier. The earth shook and the mountains shook. The sword light spread to the extreme. The cloak on the master of Samsara Palace bloomed completely. Her body lit up. Boundless sword light was released around her in the most thorough manner, and the surging sword chi rained down in a frenzy. On the Barental Glacier, a piece of solid ice with a radius of thousands of meters suddenly exploded in a loud sound. A roar full of anger and majesty suddenly sounded inside the glacier. Then a louder roar sounded. It was a clear and strange gunshot. A ball of misty light lit up the glacier surrounded by sword light again. The light was dim, misty, and illusory. With a subtle yellow color, it kept spreading in the sword intent of the glacier. Wherever the yellow light passed, all the glaciers and countless sword intents collapsed. The murderous weapon Mountain Shatter. Mountain Shatter with one shot. It was the late night of July 26th in the polar region. In the polar region, the scorching sun hung high in the night. Before the night passed, a piece of explosive news swept through the entire dark world like a hurricane. In the depths of the polar region, The headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance in the Barental Glacier was completely exposed. The master of Samsara Palace entered the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance alone. The murderous weapon Mountain Shatterer opened fire. Tyrant, the leader of the Polar Ground Alliance, was seriously injured. The master of Samsara Palace was seriously injured. None of the intelligence mentioned Lin Fengting. And almost at the same time, inside the Polar Ground Alliance, many powerful families announced their withdrawal from the alliance at the same time. Snow Country also officially issued a statement that Tyrant of the Polar Ground Alliance was a traitor of Snow Country. Eastern European countries. They were obliged to help Snow Country kill Tyrant. Different news and different lives swept through the dark world. Everyone understood what the news meant. It meant that the Polar Ground Alliance, the superpower with the largest sphere of influence, the largest number of people, and the most bloated organization in the dark world, finally collapsed completely in just a few hours after several years of preparation. It also meant that the countries in Eastern Europe, including Snow Country, which had the largest territory in the world, had no dark power that could be used. Tyrant was seriously injured. The master of Samsara Palace was seriously injured. The murderous weapon Mountain Shatterer. The murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld. The Polar Ground Alliance. The Samsara Palace. All the interests were in Eastern Europe at this time. Overnight, it seemed that everyone had a reason to go to Eastern Europe. Chapter 367. It was stormy in Snow Country. The intersection of the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic Ocean was calm. The world was bustling. The sky was the most beautiful, and the ocean was the quietest. Looking at the world from the deep sea 500 meters below, the world was like a picture that was frozen yet slowly flowing. It was colorful and breathtakingly beautiful. Wang Tianzong had stayed in this underwater world for 3 days. He rarely appreciated the scenery in the deep sea. Most of the time, he was silent or meditating, silently adjusting his state. Under his feet was a deep-sea submarine that cruised in the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic Ocean all year round. Almost all of them were new models independently developed by Beihai Province. The whole submarine showed the standard extreme style of the Wang family of Beihai. The submarine was small in size, and its combat capability was completely negligible. At the beginning of the design of the submarine codenamed Cloud, the designer did not intend for it to have any combat capability. Most of the places that could be equipped with weapons were modified into large and small engine cabins. For stronger stealth performance, Cloud even sacrificed a lot of armor thickness. There were only 6 such military submarines in the entire Wang family of Beihai, and they formed 3 squads. It was not because it was so high-end that the Wang family of Beihai could not afford it, but because it could not find a buyer at all. Such a submarine was completely abnormal. In terms of speed and stealth performance, Cloud was completely at the world's first-class level, but its combat capability and defense capability were also at the bottom of the world's first-class level. No country needed such a military submarine. Its only function was to search for resources in the deep sea more quickly and comprehensively. This was also the only use of the Wang family of Beihai to develop it. And now, Cloud, which was not well received even within the Wang family of Beihai, ushered in the most glorious moment since its service. Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Zhongzhou State had been quietly waiting inside Cloud for 3 days. It was already late at night on July 29th. There were less than 48 hours before the maneuver of the 2 academies of Zhongzhou State officially began. It was the 3rd day after Wang Tianzong appeared on the edge of the headquarters of Samsara Palace. The sea was calm. The deep sea was calm. Cloud was quietly suspended in the deep sea, motionless. Wang Tianzong, who spent most of his time meditating, opened his eyes from a somewhat narrow room, slowly came to the submarine cabin, and looked out of the window at the deep sea. The deep sea was not dark even at night. Less than 10 kilometers away, the light from the headquarters of Samsara Palace shone on the sea. The dazzling light pierced directly into the sea. The sea within a radius of tens of kilometers was brightly lit under the strong light. The brilliance was simply dazzling. Wang Tianzong silently looked at the light that reached hundreds of meters into the deep sea. He looked calm and thoughtful. Your Majesty, Xian Ming appeared behind Wang Tianzong, wanting to say something. Wang family of Beihai? As the head of all the intelligence agencies of the Wang family of Beihai, Xian Ming could be said to be Wang Tianzong's most trusted confidant. This position was not very dazzling, but it was extremely sensitive. There was almost no other family in the dark world like the Wang family of Beihai, which had gone through hundreds of years of trials and tribulations and had always maintained a rising momentum. The intelligence system of the Wang family of Beihai was even more huge and complicated. Sitting in this position, Xian Ming was like a pair of eyes hidden in the dark of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang family Shui Ocean. Ming and Wang. His Majesty asked very general questions, so he was not sure what he was asking about. Xian Ming thought about it and said slowly, Snow Country is very lively. Or it can't be more lively. Within 3 days, Fantasy World, Knights Templars, the Jiang family of South America, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, the Heroes Club, the Shadow Throne of the European Union, the Dark Knights, the Men in Black of Star State, and almost all the forces appeared in Eastern Europe. At present, the Bayes family in Eastern Europe has officially announced that Knights Templars is their ally. As time goes by, there will be more and more similar things. The Bayes family in Eastern Europe. Before the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, the Bayes family could be said to be one of the core components of the alliance. Its status was supreme in a small country in Eastern Europe. The collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance caused drastic changes in Eastern Europe. The wealthy families in the alliance, which had never been a monolithic one, were even more fragmented. The Bayes family cooperated with Knights Templars, and other wealthy families would definitely choose to cooperate with other forces. Such cooperation seemed to enhance his own strength, but even Wang Tianzong could not predict what the final result would be. The situation was too chaotic. Even the Sword Emperor had to be careful in the chaos. If he was a little careless, the so-called Sword Emperor would be easily crushed by the general trend. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and suddenly asked, "What's the attitude of Snow Country?" Silence. Xian Ming's tone was concise. Except for declaring the tyrant a traitor, Snow Country has been silent. How about Beihai Province? Wang Tianzong continued to ask. It's fine for the time being. Xian Ming answered without hesitation. Even though he was deep in the sea in the past few days, he had never stopped contacting the outside world. His phone had been ringing 24 hours a day. The great changes in the dark world were just the beginning. Wang Tianzong's cautiousness and seriousness were transferred to him, which meant endless pressure and urgency. It's fine for the time being, Wang Tianzong whispered to himself and sneered. It didn't seem a bad thing to be safe for the time being. But it was not a good thing. The geographical location of Beihai Province was extremely special, and the Wang family of Beihai was even more powerful. Although they were in Asia, they could be said to be close to Eastern Europe. When the upheaval in Eastern Europe and the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, other superpowers in the dark world might not have the energy to take care of the Wang family of Beihai, but none of the wealthy families of the Polar Ground Alliance came to the Wang family of Beihai to ask for cooperation. This kind of unscathed was enough to explain some problems. Any news from Tyrant? Wang Tianzong asked. There's no news for the time being. Tyrant was seriously injured by the master of Samsara Palace that day, and we still have no clues. Xian Ming shook his head. Fine Tyrant. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and said calmly, after you get the news about him, you go to see him in person and tell him that the Wang family of Beihai can heal his injury and even help him borrow a murderous weapon. As long as he is willing to come to Beihai Province to heal his injury, I can give him a chance to make a comeback. Xian Ming lifted his head with a surprised face. It was not surprising that Wang Tianzong drew Tyrant to his side. He was surprised that Wang Tianzong was willing to borrow a murderous weapon for Tyrant. The 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World could be said to be the only power that could be compared with the invincible realm in hundreds of years. The first murderous weapon, Human Emperor, opened fire on the border 3 years ago after more than a decade of silence. When Night Spirit was destroyed, Blue Sky Underworld sprayed sparks. In the final battle of Heaven Capital, the legend of Qin and the Shadow the Ripper had confronted each other. More than a year ago, the Dark Saint Judgment shook Northern Europe. Half a month ago, Setting Sun seriously injured Gu Xingyun. 3 days ago, after the sound of Mountain Shatterer, the Polar Ground Alliance completely collapsed. Thinking of this, Xianming was shocked. Only then did he realize that in just 3 years, more than half of the 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World had been in the state of energy storage at this time. There were still 5 murderous weapons that could be used. Which one did Wang Tianzong want to borrow? Almost without thinking, Xianming already had the answer in his mind. If the Immortality Potion, the Devil Troop, and the Heaven Punishment Troop belonged to the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai, then the murderous weapon that Wang Tianzong wanted to borrow this time was the friendship that the Wang family of Beihai had given to the outside world. It was recognized in the Dark World as a murderous weapon second only to the Human Emperor. Its power was not as good as the Human Emperor, but it was the fastest murderous weapon among the 12 murderous weapons. That was recognized as the fastest speed. Wang Tianzong drew Tyrant to his side. Tyrant was an ally. Who did Wang Tianzong want to use the fast murderous weapon in the hands of his ally to deal with? Xianming thought of the past of the Wang family of Beihai and all the peak experts in the Dark World today. He sighed in his heart. To deal with the former friendship with the former friendship? He looked at Wang Tianzong, but only saw absolute calmness on his face. Xianming agreed in a low voice and sent a message with his mobile phone. He stood quietly behind Wang Tianzong and did not move. Wang Tianzong glanced at him. Your Majesty, today is the 29th. Xianming's voice was gentle. The maneuver of the 2 academies in Zhongzhou State will start the day after tomorrow. There's still time. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and said slowly, What are you waiting for? Xianming couldn't help asking. Waiting for someone. Wang Tianzong's voice was cold. He suddenly asked, What do you think the form of the Samsara Palace's existence in the Dark World is? This inexplicable question made Xianming at a loss. He was silent for a long time before he whispered, What form? I don't know. Wang Tianzong shook his head. But I can be sure that no matter what form they are in, their existence is different from that of the Wang family of Beihai. The Samsara Palace is too mysterious, and we have too little information. I can't determine the form of the Samsara Palace's existence, so I can't determine the value of this so-called headquarters. In this case, I'm willing to waste some time and wait for something more valuable. What do you think an injured person wants to do the most? Wang Tianzong answered his own question. Of course it's to heal. And it's to heal in the safest place. Where is safer than the headquarters of the Samsara Palace? It's not far from Snow Country. I think the master of Samsara Palace will come back. Wang Tianzong whispered, That's my goal. The dazzling light radiated in all directions with the headquarters of the Samsara Palace as the core. In the center of the exquisite and beautiful island, there was an information hall that controlled the security of the entire island. The light shone from the island to the surroundings. Wherever it passed, all the images appeared on the huge screen in the information hall. Not only the impact, but some abnormal signal frequencies would also appear in the hall after being detected by the radar. So in theory, the places around the headquarters of the Samsara Palace that were covered by the light, whether in the sky or in the deep sea, had no targets that could hide. Unless the other party's technology was far beyond the radar of the Samsara Palace. More than a dozen technicians of the Samsara Palace were busy in the hall full of instruments, searching for all the suspicious images and signals. Everything was normal within dozens of kilometers of the headquarters. The images were normal. The signals were normal. A bald middle-aged man quietly stared at a small screen in the big screen. On the screen, in the depths of the sea less than 10 kilometers away from the headquarters, an imperceptible signal flickered. The signal was not suspicious, because the signal sent by the other party was exactly the same frequency as the signal returned by the radar of the headquarters. The middle-aged man silently looked at the screen in front of him and finally opened a communication window on the screen. The communication was quickly connected. A tall and plump woman in a black cloak appeared on the screen. Her breath was weak and she was silent. Your Highness, it has been confirmed that the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong, has arrived at the headquarters. Now he is less than 10 kilometers away from us. The middle-aged man looked at the figure on the screen, bowed respectfully, and said softly, "Confirmed." On the screen, the tall woman under the cloak had a hoarse voice. "Yes, I can confirm." The middle-aged man said softly. He looked up at the small screen where the signal was concentrated. On the screen, the signal with the same frequency as the radar of the Samsara Palace flashed again. Nothing unusual. But the fact that there was nothing unusual was the greatest anomaly. The rise of the Samsara Palace was too short. In terms of technological development alone, even 10 Samsara palaces could hardly catch up with the Wang family of Beihai. So, under normal circumstances, it was impossible for the Wang family of Beihai to search for the signal of the cloud submarine. But in fact, the signal sent by cloud smoke had been flashing in the information hall of the headquarters of the Samsara Palace. For 3 days, it had not changed its position at all. It was not because of the advanced technology of the Samsara Palace that it could do this. The only explanation was that the radar used by the headquarters of the Samsara Palace was also the latest model developed by the Wang family of Beihai, and it had never been sold to the public. So the feedback of cloud smoke and the radar signal was exactly the same. Obviously, Wang Tianzong did not know this. That was why he had been quietly staying in the cloud, waiting for the return of the master of Samsara Palace. The headquarters of the Samsara Palace had already known the location of Wang Tianzong's submarine. But the Samsara Palace did not intend to let Wang Tianzong down. On the communication screen, the woman in a black cloak stood up and said calmly, "I'm on my way." "Welcome." The middle-aged man's voice was a little trembling, with indescribable complexity. He bowed deeply to the screen. "Welcome back, Your Highness." The communication screen was hung up directly. The middle-aged man did not straighten up for a long time. His Highness was indeed returning. However, his return this time clearly had an unusual meaning. In the information hall, the staff stood up one by one and left the hall in turn. "Doctor, aren't you evacuating?" When the last staff member left, he subconsciously asked. "No." The middle-aged and balding doctor smiled. His face was very gentle. "I'm tired. I need to rest." The last staff member hesitated and turned to leave. The doctor turned around and adjusted the huge screen behind him to the maximum. Countless small screens disappeared on the big screen. On the whole screen, the whole scene of the headquarters of the Samsara Palace was clearly reflected. The palaces were continuous, and the birds were singing in a variety of patterns. The night was beautiful. A helicopter flew through the night sky and landed on the ground with the roar of the rotors. The hatch door opened, and a figure wrapped in a black cloak slowly walked down. She was tall and plump, but it seemed that because of the serious injury, her body was not straight. "Welcome back." The doctor looked at the man in black on the screen and muttered to himself, "Welcome to death." Returning was also a death. Chapter 368. Cloud was keenly aware of the signal that landed on the headquarters of Samsara Palace from a high altitude. The signal was a small red. This was the color of the signal that did not belong to them. It appeared on the screen of Cloud and kept flashing. Finally, it completely merged with the dense signals of the headquarters of Samsara Palace and became completely still. Xian Ming, who was standing behind Wang Tianzong, was a little excited. He also had a complicated and nervous feeling of being involved in the general trend. He didn't expect that His Majesty had waited here for 3 days, and he really found his prey. Was it the master of Samsara Palace? If it was really the master of Samsara Palace who returned to the headquarters, what did it mean? In a few days after the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, the Samsara Palace was completely destroyed? From the fall of Night Spirit 3 years ago, to the final battle of Heaven Capital, to the 3-year war in the Dark World, the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, and the competition in Eastern Europe, if the Samsara Palace was destroyed today, how chaotic would the Dark World be? He subconsciously glanced at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong's expression was calm and indifferent. He didn't know if the latest signal was the master of Samsara Palace. But he could see it. Take a look. Wang Tianzong said. Xianming picked up the walkie-talkie in the submarine and gave an order. The technicians of the Wang family of Beihai, who had been busy for several days and only needed the last step, broke through the network of the headquarters of Samsara Palace almost immediately. The firewall of the headquarters of Samsara Palace reacted violently. Alarms and warning signals appeared on every computer in the headquarters. The whole process took less than 3 seconds, and then the screen in front of Wang Tianzong suddenly turned dark. The headquarters of Samsara Palace had completely cut off the network. The process was very short. But Wang Tianzong had seen what he wanted to see. A helicopter was parked in the middle of the island of the headquarters of Samsara Palace. Beside the helicopter, a woman with a weak aura stood there, wrapped in a cloak. The island was full of bright lights that could dispel the night. Her figure stood in the light, a little blurred and dazzling. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes. All the calmness and indifference completely disappeared from him. He stood quietly, but his whole person showed a completely indescribable sharpness. The grievances with the Li family many years ago, the friendship with the Lin clan, the loss after attacking Li Honghe, the anger after summer solstice was seriously injured by the sneak attack, and the threat brought to him by Li Tianlan, who was as amazing as the chosen one, everything was accumulated in the depths of his heart. After 3 days of meditation, his sword intent had reached its true peak. Wang Tianzong slowly turned around. Your Majesty, be careful. Xianming took a deep breath and said cautiously, even now, we can't rule out that the headquarters of Samsara Palace is a trap. Wang Tianzong smiled and said nothing. He was the sword emperor of Zhongzhou state. With a sword in hand, there were no traps or conspiracies in the world. There was no day and night in the headquarters of Samsara Palace. The light seemed to surround this exquisite island forever. The sunlight faded. Light appeared. The dazzling light shrouded every corner of the island, illuminating everything. There was no day or night here, nor was there a starry sky. There was only light. The light had been alternating on the island for 3 days and nights. Countless light beams slowly rotated on the island. It shone on the sky and penetrated the ocean. The beam of light flowed in the night with a psychedelic trajectory. The helicopter landed at the highest point of the island. The area that could be regarded as a landing pad was not large, but it was extremely flat. The poor woman hidden in the black cloak stood quietly at the highest place of the headquarters of the Samsara Palace, overlooking the entire headquarters. The headquarters of the Samsara Palace was extremely beautiful, but the light was too pale, making everything lose its original color. She stood silently and did not move for a long time. Several figures walked over slowly in the light of the island. They came behind her and bowed in silence. The wind blew on the island. Her black cloak fluttered with the wind, looking a little cold. Under the pale light, she, dressed in black, was like a little black spot that should not have appeared. How is it? In the night wind, she suddenly spoke in a stiff tone. The Devil Troop has withdrawn a week ago. Most of our researchers have also left. Everything is ready. A man with a long sword on his back took a step forward and replied calmly. The man's clothes were as white as snow, which seemed to be completely integrated with the dazzling light. He was extremely handsome and had shoulder-length hair, which was not common among men. The night wind blew his hair, and the long sword on his back trembled slightly. His whole person showed a kind of outstanding handsomeness and wildness. He was a swordsman, one of the 12 super masters of Samsara Palace. She turned around and glanced at the swordsman. She also glanced at them. The swordsman was surrounded by experts who were famous in the dark world. Azura, the super master of the Samsara Palace. Azure Dragon, the super master of the Samsara Palace. Doctor, the super master of the Samsara Palace. In addition, there were several heavyweights who were not on the list of supermasters but were no less important than the supermasters in the Samsara Palace. Don't go, she asked. We are willing to die for your highness. Everyone said in unison. This time, They did not bow. Everyone stood straight in front of her with a peaceful expression. Under the cloak, she turned around and looked at the undulating and rotating light column over the headquarters of the Samsara Palace. The light column shook the night with a subtle frequency, blurred and dreamy. Under the cloak, her eyes changed from trance to coldness. She lowered her head and looked at the sea. The sea was sparkling with the light. Her eyes seemed to pass through the sea and fall into the depths of the sea. There it is. She stretched out her hand and pointed to the sea. Boom! The whole sea suddenly shook. There seemed to be an unimaginably huge force surging and boiling at the bottom of the sea. The huge force, like a mountain and a sea, broke through the sea with incredible violence and strength. The whole island seemed to be trembling slightly. All eyes focused in an instant and stared at the sea as if they wanted to see through the bottom of the sea. The bottom of the sea was not the bottom. 500 meters below the sea, there was water above and below. The majestic pressure was overwhelming from all directions, as if to completely obliterate all Wang Tianzong's vitality. The environment in the deep sea was quiet and silent. Wang Tianzong stood in the water as if he were stepping on the ground. The whole sea was surging silently. He could feel the crisp sound of his bones under the impact of the sea, and he could feel the sharp pain that his body would be torn and crushed at any time. But his eyes were still calm. Calm without any emotion. There were no ups and downs in the deep sea, but the extremely terrible turbulence went all the way south. Wang Tianzong's feet were like two anchors nailed to the deep sea. He stood steadily, adapting to the pressure that almost suffocated him, motionless. The sword intent stirred the sea with difficulty. A sword domain with a radius of a few meters appeared around Wang Tianzong's body. Wang Tianzong did not move or breathe. The huge tide around him roared past. Gradually adapting to the pressure, Wang Tianzong slowly took a step in the sea. The sea went south. He went north. Going against the water, the overwhelming water pressure seemed to become his power in an instant. His foot fell. The whole sea was boiling in an instant. The deep sea, with Wang Tianzong as the center, instantly turned into white waves all over the deep sea. A large area of the sea was completely twisted in the completely violent sword intent and power. The ever-growing submarine cloud was directly pushed out in the twisted sea. The unimaginable power spread from the bottom of the sea to the surface. The ebbing sea began to fluctuate, and the waves were endless. Wang Tianzong took the second step forward. His movements were extremely slow, but his power and sword intent were getting stronger and stronger. Wang Tianzong held the long sword in his hand tightly. This was the sharpest famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai now. The sword was called Listen to the Sea. Listen to the sea in the deep sea. The third step fell. Wang Tianzong's eyes focused instantly. In the crazy and oppressive sea, he suddenly thought of his life and the glory of the Wang family of Beihai that lasted for hundreds of years. He thought of many people: Summer Solstice, Wang Xingxiao, Wang Yuetong, Wang Xiaoyao, Li Honghe, Li Guangdelin Feng. There were too many people. With a beauty by his side and a strong enemy by his side, he was invincible and powerful. What did he want in his life? The fourth step fell. The sword domain composed of pure sword energy expanded wildly, squeezing the sea. Water was the softest, but it was also the fiercest. The moment the endless sea was squeezed out, it pressed down with a heavier momentum. The sword domain struggled to maintain and was on the verge of collapse. His body seemed to be breaking, and it became difficult to breathe. This feeling was so familiar. In a trance, Wang Tianzong laughed, which was extremely clear. He thought of what he wanted. Everything he had done in his life, including all the crimes, despicable, insidious, and shameless, was to protect the honor of the Wang family of Beihai. The honor and foundation that lasted for hundreds of years were so powerful, so vigorous, and so heavy. Heavier than the sea. He would not allow anyone to destroy this honor and majesty. Wang Tianzong's palm held the hilt of Listen to the Sea. The fifth step fell. He drew the sword. The bright sword edge went up. His figure was also going up. Wang Tianzong's eyes were condensed and focused. There was no emotion in his eyes, only sword intent. Samsara Palace? More than that. He wanted the whole world to see this sword stroke. So what if the Polar Ground Alliance collapsed? So what if Eastern Europe changed drastically? So what if the Wang family of Beihai had hidden dangers? When he was at his peak, everyone under his sword was like an ant, a piece of grass. The sword edge was unsheathed little by little. His figure rose little by little in the sea. This speed was very slow, but it was extremely heavy. At this moment, the Sword Emperor and his sword seemed to be driving the whole world. The world suddenly fell silent. Above the headquarters of Samsara Palace, the dreamy and blurred light column was still rotating, covering the entire island. The island was shaking. In everyone's horrified eyes, as far as their eyes could see, the sea area of at least 10,000 meters or even more was boiling like crazy in an instant. The vast sea was constantly shaking under the tremendous force, bringing up monstrous waves. The wind in the air completely stopped, and the whole world seemed to become an extremely violent but silent world. The vibration of the island was silent. The rolling of the waves was silent. The super masters of Samsara opened their mouths and could not make a sound. There was only sword intent in the air. The sword intent rushed out of the deep sea. It fell from the sky. The vast world was full of swords. The sea surface shook more and more violently. The sparkling sea surface gradually changed color, and the flashing light gradually turned pure white. The tremendous force completely stirred the seawater in the area of 10,000 meters. The seawater began to rise silently and overflowed the edge of the island. Everyone could only watch this scene helplessly. In the silence, there was an indescribable sense of powerlessness and despair. Boom! The loud sound, as if the world was broken, suddenly sounded at the moment when the sea surface boiled to the limit. The sky fell and the earth cracked. It was deafening. No one could see Wang Tianzong's figure. There was only the sea in front of everyone. The sea was completely overturned. The sea area of 10,000 meters rose at the same time with the crazy eruption of sword intent. The seawater was rising continuously and hitting the sky. What was the connection between the sky and the sea? This was not the scene at the end of the sight. In the loud roar, the endless seawater on the sea surface was like a mountain suddenly rising from the sea. The mountain was 10,000 meters high, and the sword intent was awe-inspiring, going straight into the sky. It was close at hand, but it was so high that one could not see the edge. Infinite sword intent. Boundless huge waves. The wild waves, like giant pillars supporting the sky, seemed to reach the end of the sky, and then fell down wildly. The sword intent that broke out completely in an instant completely merged with the huge waves. The flying current went down 30,000 feet. Under the sword energy, there was only destruction. This was the full outbreak of the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. This was the peak sword of the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. It surpassed the collision between a sword intent and deity when he was in Heaven Capital. It surpassed the 25th blade in the night sky of Lin. The sword energy was 10,000 meters long, mighty and mighty. 6 paths of reincarnation. 1 sword to dominate the world. The 10,000-meter long sword energy fell from the sky, and heaven and earth seemed to be rotating. There was only 1 sword in the world. In the headquarters of the Samsara Palace, a large number of lights rotated in the trembling. The light illuminated the sky, the mountain-like towering waves, and the sword. This sword was like a mountain, like a sky curtain. The most invincible sword. Boom! Countless beams of light rotated on the island, and a large area of smoke and fire appeared in every corner of the Samsara Palace. All the weapons in the headquarters of the Samsara Palace fired at the same time. In the smoke, the faint blue lightning was faint. All the superiors of the thundershocking realm were breaking out all their strength regardless of life and death. The huge waves, the sword energy, the sparks, and the lightning met in the air. In the rolling smoke, the blurred and dreamy beams of light were still rotating. The waves in the deep sea were towering, and the light on the island was disordered. The smoke, light, and sword intent covered everything. The whole island seemed to disappear completely. All the cannon fire and sword intent were completely shattered by the sword chi that fell straight down. The huge waves condensed by the sword intent burst into splashes all over the sky, but the splashes were condensed and did not disperse. They cycled between the falling waves. The sword intent did not dissipate, but became stronger. On the island of the Samsara Palace, hundreds of beams of light suddenly went out and lit up again. The beams of light intertwined. At the moment of uncertainty, a silent but fierce sword light suddenly lit up in a trance. The sword energy and the huge waves fell between heaven and earth, straight up and down. But the sword light that suddenly lit up seemed to cross the sky and the earth. The extremely condensed sword light was like a crescent moon that was more than a kilometer long. The sword intent lingered, and every arc had natural beauty and dominance. The sword light was still falling. In an instant, the huge arc of light over a kilometer broke through the smoke and fire, flew out of the island, and went straight into the sea. The sword light, with indomitable sharpness and determination, hit the huge waves that connected the sky and the earth hard. The huge waves that were as high as 10,000 meters suddenly trembled. Wang Tianzong, standing at the highest place, also trembled. The next moment, the huge arc of light suddenly shattered, and the sword intent diffused and dissipated. Wang Tianzong's 6 paths of reincarnation also weakened. But no matter how weak it was also 6 paths of reincarnation. The huge waves connecting the sky and the earth seemed to have changed, but it also seemed to have not changed. The seawater kept rising into the sky, and then fell down with the incomparably majestic sword intent. Water was the softest. But the water in the sword intent was as cold as ice and as hard as steel. The majestic sword energy fell in the center of the Samsara Palace. The sky and the earth shook together. All the light on the island disappeared in an instant. The sword energy pierced the island from the sky, then the island, and went straight into the deep sea. Cracks appeared on the whole island in the continuous loud noise. The center of the island suddenly burst out a light that reflected the waves and the sword energy. The sword energy penetrated the whole island, and the land on the island was instantly broken. The land and stones kept flying, and it spread to the whole island from the center. The super master of the Samsara Palace. The woman in the cloak. It was a magnificent building. Flowers, trees, beaches, weapons, everything was fluttering in the sword intent. The 10,000-meter high waves finally fell and hit the wreckage of the island hard. The island shook and sank completely into the deep sea. The boiling seawater flooded the entire headquarters of the Samsara Palace, and there was no trace of its existence. Wang Tianzong's body shook violently in the air. Because of exhaustion, his face was a little pale. But the whole island was completely turned into dust under his sword, and a small amount of wreckage had sunk to the bottom of the sea. Countless corpses floated in the sea and then sank. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and listened to the sea tightly in his hand. In the distance, the cloud had emerged from the water and rushed in the direction of Wang Tianzong at full speed. Wang Tianzong slowly landed on the submarine and entered the cabin. "Your Majesty!" Xian Ming rushed up at the first time and seemed to want to help Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong's power broke out too thoroughly, and he seemed to be a little weak and pale. But Xian Ming's eyes were full of irrational worship and fanaticism. "I'm fine." Through the submarine, Wang Tianzong looked at the sea that no longer existed in front of him. He listened to the sea in his hand and was silent for a long time. Xian Ming, who was full of excitement, stood beside him and resisted the desire to speak. He had never seen such a sword move in his life. What was His Majesty thinking at this time when he wielded the sword? "Xian Ming." Wang Tianzong suddenly spoke. "Yes." Xian Ming subconsciously straightened his body. Wang Tianzong looked out of the window, his eyes distant. After a long silence, he whispered, "People say that the 4 realms of martial arts are the foundation, and the invincible realm is the limit. What do you think is above the invincible realm?" Xian Ming's body shook violently, and his heart suddenly felt cold. Wang Tianzong shook his head and whispered, "Go to Huading." The submarine left quietly. There was no light on the sea, and it became dark again. The The tall figure wrapped in a black cloak had been dead for a long time. Her body was almost completely broken, and her limbs were missing. The broken body rose and fell in the sea, lifeless. Another submarine gradually emerged on the sea. A diver jumped out of the submarine, swam to the deep sea, picked up the broken body wrapped in the cloak, and dragged it into the submarine. There was a small conference room in the submarine. Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting sat face to face, and flaming fire stood behind Qin Weibai as usual. There were only 3 of them. There was a screen hanging in the conference room. The screen repeatedly played the scene of Wang Tianzong's attack not long ago. The shaking island, the overturned sponge, the huge waves that suddenly connected heaven and earth, and the sword energy that filled the world. Lin Fengting stared at the screen seriously. Apart from graveness, there were no other emotions in his eyes. This sword move. After a long time, Lin Fengting slowly opened his mouth. His voice was a little hoarse. I can't catch it. You've just tried. It turns out that you really can't catch it. Qin Weibai said calmly. Before the destruction of the headquarters of Samsara Palace, even Wang Tianzong thought that the huge arc of light was the dying counterattack of the master of Samsara Palace. It was her 24 moves of sword. But at the moment when the light and shadow intertwined and blurred, the huge arc of light was actually driven by Lin Fengting's sword. Lin Fengting was a little far from the island, so the sword energy was a little weak. Wang Tianzong just used one sword move, and he could continue to use the sword. There were all kinds of excuses. But in fact, even if Lin Fengting stood on the island, it was difficult to completely break the 6 paths of reincarnation no matter how many swords he used. Lin Fengting was a little depressed and lost in thought. He was lazy and aloof from the world, but it didn't mean that he really had no desire to win. He knew that he was no match for Wang Tianzong, but he never thought that under this sword move, the gap between him and Wang Tianzong would be so huge. Wang Tianzong broke through. Qin Weibai said softly. Her voice was very soft, but the content was earth-shattering. Lin Fengting and Flaming Fire trembled at the same time. Of course, it's just half a step forward from the peak of the invincible realm. But this half a step is already enough to widen the gap that already exists. Qin Weibai's tone was a little complicated. The sword move just now came from the deep sea. Under great pressure, it made Wang Tianzong go further. This is my miscalculation. If I'm right, the current Wang Tianzong is only half a level lower than Dongqing Huangtu in the past. In this era, it's really hard for him to find an opponent. Dongqing Huangtu, Lin Fengting smiled self-deprecatingly. The real chosen one. Obviously, Wang Tianzong is only half a step away from the real chosen one, or even infinitely close. Qin Weibai looked at the screen and said softly, in fact, it's normal. The Wang family of Beihai has been glorious for too long. The longer it is glorious, the greater the pressure on the air. Now that chaos is coming, it's no surprise that Wang Tianzong broke through under such pressure. Lin Fengting smiled, took a deep breath, and barely stabilized his mind. What should Tanlan do? He asked softly. The final maneuver is about to begin. Who can control Wang Tianzong? The Dongqing clan has the power to make Wang Tianzong afraid. Qin Weibai was silent for a long time before she whispered. Just afraid? Lin Fengting asked. If Tianzong has made up his mind, can Tianlan survive? Qin Weibai was silent. Silence itself was an answer. This is not a foolproof plan. Lin Fengting said. Who could have thought that he would break through today? If there is no breakthrough, the Huading maneuver is foolproof. Qin Weibai's tone was a little bitter. The door of the conference room was pushed open. An elite of Samsara Palace in a diving suit put half of the black body on the conference table and then left in silence. Qin Weibai looked at the body on the conference table silently. The master of Samsara Palace did not draw her sword in the headquarters. So it was not the master of Samsara Palace under the cloak. But Wang Tianzong would not know this. Qin Weibai reached out and lifted the cloak on the body. The face of Shadowless, one of the 12 super masters of Samsara Palace, was revealed. She looked at Shadowless's body and took a deep breath. After today, Samsara Palace will turn from bright to dark. All the sacrifices are worth it. Unfortunately, she did not finish her words. But Lin Fengting knew what she was going to say. Wang Tianzong broke through again, and his sword intent reached 10,000 meters. He was almost on par with the Chosen One. If he had been a little closer at that time, even if he did not die today, he would have gained enough surprises. Unfortunately, Lin Fengting shook his head with a bitter smile. Am I going to Huading? No. Chapter 369. At night of the garden party, it was drizzling and scattered between heaven and earth. Wang Tianzong sat in the garden pavilion with flourishing flowers and looked at the falling rain outside the pavilion. He silently put down the phone in his hand and said nothing. Wang Xiaoyao sat opposite Wang Tianzong and drank. Seeing his elder brother hang up the phone, he said solemnly, "Brother, what did the president say?" What else could he say? Of course, he praised the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong smiled and looked relaxed, but the mobile phone in his hand was tightened by him quietly. As the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, the most powerful wealthy family in Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong did not have many calls with President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State. Every time they talked, the two sides would not talk much. This time, the president went abroad for a visit. This international call was not long, just less than 5 minutes. As Wang Tianzong said on the phone, President Li Huaqing praised the Wang family of Beihai. He mentioned the pillar of Zhongzhou State, the cornerstone of the country, and the merit of the Sword Emperor several times. Wang Tianzong listened silently. He knew that these praises were meaningless. What he cared about was what Li Huaqing wanted to say, or Li Huaqing's attitude. Li Huaqing's attitude was only 4 words. He hopes that I can focus on national affairs. Wang Tianzong said. There was no emotion in his voice, and his face did not change. Elder brother, have you decided? Wang Xiaoyao smiled and looked down at the wine in front of him. He is just a young man. Even if he is a heavenly son, so what? After all, he is still young. The life and death of a young man is not a national affair. Wang Tianzong's tone was indifferent. He came to Huading for the final maneuver of the 2 academies. On this day, he had received many calls from the academics, the giant group, and even some people inside the Southeast group had vaguely tested his attitude. Wang Tianzong had made up his mind. So he did not show his attitude to anyone. His lack of attitude was his attitude. He must kill Li Tianlan. He was not going to give in or give face to anyone. The life and death of a young heavenly son is not a national affair. But isn't the life and death of a young heavenly son a national affair? Wang Xiaoyao asked. Although there were not many young heavenly sons, they were not the only ones. Wang Tianzong, Li Kuangdu, Gu Xingyun, and others were also called the young heavenly sons of Zhongzhou State when they were young. But the fact proved that although they entered the invincible realm, they did not have the potential to become the real heavenly sons. Even among the young generation today, Wang Xingxiao, Gu Hanshan, and even Jiang Shangyu could be regarded as young heavenly sons. But there was only one true prodigy, Li Tianlan. The combat capability of the invincible realm at the age of 22. If he was given time, 10 years at most, he could even go to the top of the divine list in the Dark World. At that time, Li Tianlan was only in his early 30s, enough to guard Zhongzhou State for at least a few decades. Was such a prospect not a national affair? So what if I do? Li Huaqing asked me to prioritize national affairs. But in my heart, national affairs were not important. Family matters are of utmost importance. Wang Tianzong said calmly, Zhongzhou State will lose Li Tianlan in the future, and someone will carry the flag of Zhongzhou State in the Dark World. If the Wang family of Beihai had Li Tianlan in the future, how would Mount Dibing survive? How can we guarantee the safety of the 20 million people in Beihai province? His voice was not high, but it was getting firmer and firmer, like an unshakable rock. There is no right or wrong in many things. I am eliminating the future enemy of the Wang family of Beihai in advance. This is what I have to do, no matter what I have to face. Wang Xiaoyao lowered his head and was silent for a long time. The sound of falling rain outside the pavilion was louder. Drops of rain began to drift into the pavilion. Wang Tianzong turned the wineglass. Quietly, all the wind blew in the opposite direction with him as the center, and the rain around the pavilion was suddenly blown away. Have you thought about the consequences? Wang Xiaoyao suddenly asked. What consequences? Wang Tianzong's tone was cold. They will protect Li Tianlan alive. Because he is a heavenly son. A dead heavenly son is nothing. Is it the same for the purgatory of Heaven Capital and the Lin clan? Wang Xiaoyao asked. Wang Tianzong paused and narrowed his eyes. He looked up at the rain in the sky and said blandly, I am mentally prepared. Even if deity and Fengting appear on the scene, they can't change anything. If I want to kill, they can't stop me. Brother. Wang Xiaoyao looked at Wang Tianzong. His tone was a little strange. You are crazy. I am not crazy. Wang Tianzong smiled. You don't understand what the rise of a real heavenly son means to the Wang family of Beihai. He looked at his brother with soft eyes. You are not in my position, so you can't fully understand the glory of the Wang family of Beihai that has been passed down for hundreds of years. I am the patriarch. In my position, nothing is more important than the glory of the Wang family of Beihai. I'm talking about anything. Including me? Including Yuetong? Wang Xiaoyao looked into Wang Tianzong's eyes. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes slightly and said calmly, What do you mean? Wang Xiaoyao looked at Wang Tianzong for a while, then lowered his head and said in a low voice, Yuetong doesn't want Li Tianlan to die. I don't want to either. Wang Yuetong wanted Li Tianlan to live. Wang Tianzong could understand. But why didn't Wang Xiaoyao want Li Tianlan to die? Wang Tianzong looked at his brother. From the other's face, he saw pain and entanglement, as well as a trace of tenderness and yearning. Wang Tianzong understood and sneered slightly. Haven't you given up on that woman yet? Wang Xiaoyao held the glass tightly, gritted his teeth, and didn't look at Wang Tianzong. Aren't you a neat freak? Wang Tianzong said in a mean tone, She has been played by Li Tianlan. Isn't the woman he used dirty in your heart? She is not dirty. There was a bang. Wang Xiaoyao punched the marble table hard and stood up with red eyes. His elder brother's words directly pierced a fact that he was most unwilling to face for several years. Wang Xiaoyao seemed to be greatly stimulated. He opened his eyes wide and stared at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong kept his mouth shut and just looked at his brother calmly. I don't mind. Wang Xiaoyao said in a hoarse voice, Elder brother, just destroy Li Tianlan. If he dies, little Bai and I really have no room. The light rain turned into heavy rain. The heavy rain was messily falling. Wang Tianzong looked at Wang Xiaoyao quietly and said nothing. Wang Xiaoyao finally understood that it was not his elder brother who was crazy, but himself. But he really liked and even fell in love with that woman. He fell in love with her charm, her coldness, and her every move. As long as he could get her, he really didn't mind that she was Li Tianlan's woman. She would always be a goddess, superior, inviolable, and blasphemous. Wang Xiaoyao knew that he was hopeless and crazy. Let him be crazy. Marrying her was King rational and dignified. The glory of the Wang family of Beihai that had been passed down for hundreds of years? Was it important? Maybe it was. But that was what his elder brother had to bear. It was not what he needed to bear. It had never been what he needed to bear. Elder brother, please. Wang Xiaoyao whispered. He had never been so humble in front of his elder brother who had always taken care of him since he was a child. Shut up. Wang Tianzong said lightly, Sit down. His voice was not high, but it was very powerful. Wang Xiaoyao clenched his fists tightly and sat down. You want to use Li Tianlan to threaten Qin Weibai? Even if she gives in, are you willing to get her like this? Wang Tianzong asked. Time will change everything. Wang Xiaoyao lowered his head and gritted his teeth. Time can really change everything. Wang Tianzong nodded with deep sympathy. But such a change is definitely not what you want. You threaten Qin Weibai with Li Tianlan's life. What can she do even if she gives in? Do you really think that Qin Weibai can't do anything if the master of Samsara Palace is dead? If she enters the Wang family of Beihai, decades later, when I die, the whole Wang family of Beihai may be surnamed Qin. Wang Xiaoyao's face changed. When he was about to speak, Wang Tianzong continued, I can forget what you just said. Use your brain when you speak in the future. Elder brother. Wang Xiaoyao's face changed. Pour the wine. Wang Tianzong knocked on the wineglass. Wang Xiaoyao silently picked up the flagon and poured a glass of wine for Wang Tianzong. In the pavilion, under the blurred rainy night, Wang Tianzong raised his glass to Wang Xiaoyao. The night rain was hazy. The bell rang in the garden party. The deep and clear bell rang throughout the entire garden party. Wang Tianzong glanced at the night sky. The bell rang. Midnight had passed. At this moment, it was the early morning of July 31st in Zhongzhou State. There were less than 8 hours to go before the final maneuver. Wang Xiaoyao raised his glass, clinked with Wang Tianzong's, and drank up the wine in the glass. The warm wine was slightly cold. The midsummer at the end of July seemed to be a touch more chilly. The two brothers sat quietly in the pavilion. They had long been tired of the night view. The good wine was tasteless. The two brothers drank quietly, one glass after another, with worries on their minds. This year was destined to be a turbulent year for the Dark World and Zhongzhou State. The upheaval in Eastern Europe and the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance affected the most. In addition to the Eastern European countries led by Snow Country, Zhongzhou State, which was close to Snow Country, was the most severely affected. The territory of the entire Dark World seemed to have begun to condense in just a few days. The fantasy world dominator chaos appeared in Eastern Europe. The two invincible realm masters of the Jiang family of South America, nicknamed Jiangde and Jiang by the Dark World, appeared in Eastern Europe. The Vatican's Saint War Angel Arcis appeared in Eastern Europe. The president of the Heroes Club appeared in Eastern Europe. Cass Rotter, the god of war of Star State and the leader of the Men in Black, appeared in Eastern Europe. The Shadow Throne entered Snow Country. The battle between the Dark Knights and the Holy Sanctum started from Northern Europe to Eastern Europe. All the major assassin groups and mercenary groups in the world were ready to make a move. Eastern Europe seemed to have become a microcosm of the whole Dark World. Today, most of the forces of the Dark World had gathered there, and more than half of the invincible realm experts on the divine and holy lists had gathered there. The whole of Eastern Europe was like a powder keg on the verge of exploding. Once it exploded, Eastern Europe would be in turmoil, and even Zhongzhou State would not be spared. Zhongzhou State was the strongest country in the world. With such a huge force gathered in Eastern Europe, everyone seemed to have a reason to invade Zhongzhou State. Especially when Gu Xingyun, the state-protecting war god of Zhongzhou State, was seriously injured. However, everyone seemed to have forgotten. But it also seemed as if it did not dare to make a sound. Gu Xingyun was missing from Zhongzhou State. But there was still Sword Emperor in Beihai of Zhongzhou State. No one wanted to think of this suffocating name. But the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State appeared in front of everyone with his actions. Where the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic Ocean meet. The headquarters of Samsara Palace. He raised Listen to the Sea, and the sword chi was 10,000 meters long. The headquarters of the Samsara Palace completely collapsed under the 6 paths of reincarnation. The entire Dark World seemed to be shrouded in the shadow of the 6 paths of reincarnation. This was the way the Wang family of Beihai took the initiative to declare force before the war was about to spread to Beihai. Therefore, the Wang family of Beihai released the video of Wang Tianzong's attack immediately. The recording was complete. However, the sword chi in the video was so majestic that even the video could not contain it completely. Everyone could only see the monstrous sword intent rising from the surface of the sea into the clouds and striking the heavens, but they were unable to estimate the specific power of that sword. Gu Xingyun had watched the video of that moment countless times. The sword chi entered the sky and fell from above, as if it had pierced through the heavens and torn apart the earth. The headquarters of Samsara Palace was a blur of light and shadow. Sword chi and light intertwined at the same time, and the entire island began to explode at the very center. The Master of Samsara Palace. Samsara Supermaster. Samsara Headquarters. Everything was annihilated by this one sword. With just one sword stroke, the master of Samsara Palace died in battle. 3 super masters of Samsara Palace were killed. The entire Samsara Palace seemed to fall apart in an instant with this sword and completely disappeared in the dark world. Gu Xingyun watched the video silently. His face was dignified and solemn. It's like a miracle. After a long time, Gu Xingyun took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, Wang Tianzong is indeed invincible. But he is not as invincible as you think. The master of Samsara Palace is not as weak as you think. Li Shi stood beside Gu Xingyun and said in a numb tone, What do you mean? Gu Xingyun frowned and turned around. Wang Tianzong should have broken through. Li Shi said in a calm tone, but he has not completely surpassed the invincible realm. In the current dark world, he has an absolute advantage over anyone, but he still lacks a trace of absolute dominance. The last sword stroke of the master of Samsara Palace is also very strong. Wang Tianzong's sword intent is the main reason for the explosion of this island, but there seems to be a self-destruct device inside Samsara Palace. Li Shi paused. The master of Samsara Palace should have wanted to die with Wang Tianzong. But unfortunately, Wang Tianzong broke through half a step, and his sword energy was 10,000 meters long. The self-destruct device and sword energy on the island of Samsara Palace completely exploded. The master of Samsara Palace died without a burial place, but Wang Tianzong was not affected because he was too far away. The master of Samsara Palace is dead, Gu Xingyun murmured to himself and sneered. It's good that he died. It's good that he died. Li Shi stood expressionless and said blandly, It's not a good thing for you that Wang Tianzong's enemy died. The current Sword Emperor is so strong that even if he is not the real Chosen One, he is infinitely close to the Chosen One. He can be said to be the only god in the entire Dark World. If he pacifies Eastern Europe, Kunlun City will never have a chance to breathe. God! Gu Xingyun sneered and squinted at Li Shi. There seems to be a man in East Island who claims to be a god. Why isn't he the so-called god? Li Shi looked at Gu Xingyun coldly and said nothing. The upheaval in Eastern Europe is a crisis and an opportunity. It's hard for Zhongzhou State to stay out of it. I'm injured and can't travel far. After the maneuver, when Li Tianlan dies, you go to Snow Country on my behalf. Gu Xingyun looked at Li Shi and quietly changed the topic. Li Shi nodded expressionlessly. This was what Gu Xingyun had already said. Gu Xingyun closed his eyes and said coldly, I don't care what you do. But remember, what I want is the interests of Kunlun City. If you do well on the trip to Snow Country, I will give you freedom after I recover from my injury. If you don't do well, you won't have to see Qingqing in the future. He glanced at Li Shi and said meaningfully, I only want the interests of Kunlun City. Li Shi sneered and said nothing. She knew what Gu Xingyun meant. Gu Xingyun only wanted the interests of Kunlun City, which meant that in order to achieve her goal, she could attack anyone on this trip. In the absence of Samsara Palace, her opponents were the major forces in the Dark World. They were Sai City and other forces in Zhongzhou State. It was also the Wang family of Beihai. How could enemies and allies be so clearly distinguished? Li Shi was not angry, but this kind of cold smile made her a little less numb and a little more proud. Gu Xingyun was a little short of breath. He stretched out his hand and suddenly pulled Li Shi over, reaching out to tear Li Shi's clothes. Pa! Li Shi slapped Gu Xingyun hard in the face without hesitation. As the absolute seeded player in the maneuver of the 2 academies, Wang Shengxiao opened up a separate area in the Sky Academy. All his confidence and pride began to disappear in front of Li Tianlan's absolute strength. He was now at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Li Tianlan had the combat capability of the invincible realm. Wang Shengxiao could hardly imagine how big the gap between the two was. The maneuver was getting closer and closer. In a short time, Wang Shengxiao knew very well that he could not catch up with Li Tianlan's footsteps. So now he no longer wanted to win. What he wanted was not to be defeated. At least he could not be defeated too badly. 6 paths of reincarnation, the most powerful unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai, was said to be one sword, but it could be divided freely. The former was 6 paths of reincarnation. The latter was samsara. Wang Shengxiao had absolute confidence that as long as he could use samsara in the final maneuver, he would be invincible. So a few days before the final maneuver, Wang Shengxiao's voice completely disappeared. He stayed alone in his room, either meditating or tempering his sword intent. Song Si and Wang Shengxiao stayed together. In their residence, the fierce and crazy sword intent was increasing almost every minute and second. In the end, even the classrooms of the Sky Academy did not dare to approach this area, let alone ordinary students. As the sword intent in this residence became more and more violent, more and more people began to look forward to it. The heavenly son of Zhongzhou State. The heavenly son of Beihai. What kind of dazzling sparks would the collision of the two people produce? Would it be a one-sided crush? Or would it be an evenly matched fight? Everyone was thinking about this question. Song Si was also thinking about it. The night was getting heavier. The area where she and Wang Shengxiao lived was full of steady but violent sword intent. The night was quiet. Song Si looked at her watch. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. There were less than 5 hours before the final maneuver officially began. All the sword intent began to gather toward Wang Shengxiao's room. Song Si looked nervous and excited. She didn't know whether Wang Shengxiao had succeeded or not, but after several days of absolute concentration and meditation, she was sure that Wang Shengxiao must have gained something. She stood up subconsciously and hesitated to walk to Wang Shengxiao's room. In an instant, there was a sudden change. The slowly gathering sword intent became completely violent in an instant. The sword energy madly gathered toward Wang Shengxiao's room, and then shot out of the room in the blink of an eye. All the furniture in the room and living room was completely smashed by the sword energy. The sword energy rushed out of the door, and all the sword intent was completely out of control, bursting out in every corner. Song Si, whose face changed dramatically, rushed to Wang Shengxiao's room without hesitation. In the room, Wang Shengxiao had opened his eyes. His face was flushed and his head was sweating. Seeing Song Si rush in with a frightened face, he smiled softly, helpless and powerless. "What's wrong with you?" Song Si asked in a trembling voice. Wang Shengxiao's mouth moved. Puff! A mouthful of dark red blood sprayed directly from his mouth, staining the floor of the room red. It was still raining outside the window. It was getting louder and louder. The darkest time before dawn gradually faded. In midsummer, the morning light outside the window lit up little by little. Day and night alternated. Before the final maneuver, the night that was destined to be peaceful but extraordinary finally passed. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.